first heard about Kingdom Come Deliverance as a wee little lad over 10 years ago, around 2014, and I remember the devs showing how historically accurate and realistic the game was going to be. Cool, I thought. When's it come out? I'm okay. Ow? Following the years after KCD1's release, it developed an astounding, loving community comprised of people who could appreciate its astute attention to detail with its historical accuracy, the authentic RPG mechanics, and graphics that still stand up today. But you're all probably here because Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 came out not long ago, and, well, it's fantastic.
What are you looking at?
What is that?
This game is woke! They added a blackout to this game! There's gays too! They put the gays in the game! It's woke!
I think that guy might be a little lost. Anyway, the stories of both KCD 1 and 2 are possibly the longest in gaming history. Like, I'm not even joking. So in this video, I'm gonna explain the entire story of both games so you can get all caught up and see the big picture. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Boop. Okay.
I feel quite hungry.
The game begins with a bit of a historical context about the events surrounding the narrative with Wenceslas and Sigismund before showing you a beautiful cinematic of the landscape and people living their lives in the town of Skalitz. Before honing in on a woman carrying a basket down the street up to her home. You find out that this is your mother, and she tells your father about how you, Henry, were up all of last night drinking like a lord, as your father responds, telling her to wake you up. As you're being woken up, your mother notices a bandaged gash on the back of your hand and deduces that you've been practicing swordsmanship with the mysterious man Vanyek, who's been staying in town recently. And then you're offered your first choices in the game. She inquires about what you were up to last night, and depending on your choices, it determines your 2 initial stat boosts. She then tells you that you promised your father that you'd help him finish Sir Radzig's sword today, and that you better hurry and see him. When you see your father, he sends you on a batch of errands for him, like buying charcoal, collecting a debt, getting a crossguard from the castle, and getting some ale from your sweetheart Bianca. You go to see Vanyek, and he gives you a rundown about how combat works in the game. It's kind of a lot like chivalry. Then you make your way to the tavern, where you witness a man named Deutsch arguing with another patron about the situation with Wenceslas and Sigismund about who is the rightful king. Interacting with your friends Matthew, Fritz, and Matthias, who catch you up on the situation, they suggest that you all throw manure at Deutsch's freshly washed house, which you can either choose to tag along for or turn down to focus on the tasks your father gave you like a good boy. I turned it down because I wanted to focus on getting to the cool night fights and stuff, but later you run into a cutscene as you watch your friends throwing manure at Deutsch's house before his son and his friends show up, and you kind of get into a brawl. You then go and see Kunesh, who's the one who owes your father money, and you try and convince him to pay his debt before he gets irritated and begins to attack you. You pretty quickly get your ass kicked and have to go back and see your mother to get patched up.
I'm hurt. Won't stop bleeding.
Oh, now, stop squealing like a baby.
And report back to your father, where he instead hands you money for the charcoal and ale. I then quickly picked up the charcoal and crossguard before heading over to the tavern to complete the final task of getting the ale. You talk with Bianca about said ale, as she slyly remarks that you can make up for it this evening with an intimate rendezvous, and also gifts you some savior schnapps, which is this game's form of a save mechanic. After returning to your father with everything he asked you for, you begin a cutscene as you work with him to finish the sword. During this work, he offers some fatherly advice about life.
The German pays well, and having my son in the pillory helps nothing and nobody, least of all the king. Do you understand? Yes. Look me in the eye, Henry. Do you understand?
I understand.
God, this game is so fantastically written. Not long after, a girl named Teresa shows up about some nails and asks you how Bianca is. Oh God, what in the rom-com love triangle is this? Your father teases you about her and then begins testing out the blade on a pole as a pair of men show up. One of the men ends up being Sir Radzig, whom the sword is for, as he tries it out and comments on your father's excellent work, before offering you an opportunity to try it out as well, much to your father's dismay as you try. Radzig mentions a long and complicated story during which your father has a rather pained expression on his face. The other noble expresses his interest to hear the tale, but unfortunately Radzig must leave as Radzig sees his guest off to a trade city south of Skalitz called Sasau. You ask your father about what they meant about it being a complicated story, and he replies that he might tell you someday, just not right now. He expresses that all he wants out of life right now is to be able to end his days peacefully in Skalitz, beneath the linden tree and by your mother's side. You in turn express your desire to eventually settle down as well, but first you want to travel the world, meet people, and have adventures. You're then interrupted by the sound of a man on a horse galloping frantically up to the castle, and then you hear the sounds of horns. You look back to hear people screaming, houses burning, and a large army dotting the hillscape. The army is led by Sigismund, and a mysterious bald man with a mustache which honestly gives me Agent 47 if he was a biker vibes. Sigismund nods to Mr. Lex Luthor looking ass as he signals the army to attack Skalitz. While the initial volley of arrows begins killing the residents, your father grabs you and shouts for you to grab anything important from the house, then to take them and the sword to the castle. He follows up by saying to give the sword to Sir Radzig, and that if anything happens, Radzig will take care of you because he owes your father. Good old dad then rushes to go find your mother in the village and help her while you grab things from the house. As you begin heading towards the castle, you notice your parents aren't back yet, so you hand your stuff to the guards and run back into town to go find them. You then witness a cutscene of your father staving off the raiders while protecting your mother as Baldy stalks them from a safe distance. You enter the main village just in time to see fucking Caillou gallop in and kill your father, the other raiders rushing in to slaughter your mother as well. Mr. Clean stares at you menacingly as you rush back to the castle while being chased by the raiders. The guards' fire arrows give you time to get back to safety, but it's too late as they begin raising the gate. They urge you to find a horse and get to Talmberg to warn them of what's happened here, so you flank around a hidden path down the side of the castle as Radzig watches you from above. You rush down the path into the fields and grab a horse as you witness Teresa and the other villagers being attacked by the raiders. I'm just gonna let that happen. I don't really care.
No, bro, you have to protect the poor woman.
I need to go.
No, man. No, man.
You gallop away as quick as you can while being chased by more raiders on horseback, one of whom shoots you in the leg and causes you to start rapidly bleeding out as you desperately try to outride them on your way to Talmberg. As you get within the vicinity of Talmberg, the archers from the castle stave off your pursuers and you make it inside the castle and promptly collapse. You're barely able to blurt out that Skalitz has been attacked by a huge army, but you don't know who they were. The captain rips out your arrow and bandages your leg before sending you to go speak to the Lord of Talmberg, Lord Divish, about the details of what all just happened. You find out that the captain who helped you is named Robard, and Divish begins questioning you about what banners the army used and if there were any other survivors, which you reply that you don't know. You tell him that lots of people took refuge in the castle, but Divish informs you that they can't do anything to help them because they have too few men to be able to fight the attackers, much less enough to defend their own castle if the invaders attack Talmberg next. His bailiff suggests that maybe the mysterious soldiers you can't recognize are the Cumans that Sigismund has in his army, and that maybe the reason for their attack was to steal Skalitz's silver. Divish instructs Robard to have all the Talmberg citizens come inside the gates, just in case they get attacked. Later that evening, Divish's wife, Lady Stephanie, knocks on the door to your room, bringing wine and asking about the details of the attack on Skalitz. Henry later suffers a nightmare of the whole attack and dreams of his parents begging him to help them and to not be a coward before being jostled awake by Robard, informing him that a company from Skalitz is approaching and it might be Sigismund coming to attack. It's then revealed the company is actually Radzig, and everyone from Skalitz who survived had escaped under cover of a stormy night and are headed for Rete. Radzig asks you if you want to come with him to Rete, and you inform him that you need to return to Skalitz and bury your parents. He exclaims that it would be foolish and asks Divish to make sure you don't leave Talmberg until things quiet down. You help keep watch of the battlements overnight, and in the morning, the horns are sounded because Sigismund's army is spotted on the hill next to Talmberg, appearing ready to attack. Then, a lone horseman gallops towards Talmberg, and who is it but Daddy Warbucks? He introduces himself as Sir Markvart von Aulitz, explaining that he's in the service of Sigismund and that they're looking for Radzig, accusing him of using Skalitz's silver to fund insurrectionists to the king. Divish knows that this is a fabricated pretense for Sigismund to steal Skalitz's silver, and so he assures Markvart that Radzig is not at Talmberg, and Markvart goes to inform Sigismund. The entire castle holds their breath as they wait to see Sigismund's response. Sigismund raises his hand as if he's about to signal an attack, but instead signals for his army to withdraw as Talmberg erupts in cheers. You then approach Robard and try to convince him to grant you permission to return to Skalitz, but again to no avail. So you then steal a set of guard clothes and bribe the gate guard to open it for you. After successfully sneaking out of Talmberg, you're free to make your way to Skalitz to bury your parents. As you draw nearer to Skalitz, you scan the area, and after being sure that Sigismund's army has left, you enter the town. While Henry stands here in disbelief and complete shock at seeing his fellow villagers strewn around, burned and mangled, I want to level with you. Before you skip this thinking it's a sponsorship, it's not. I'm actually just a small business owner, and besides making YouTube videos, I found a passion in doing 3D animation. Specifically, I've started working with other creators to integrate their personalities into 3D to make entertaining segments when they end up with a sponsor for their video. Okay. Now Henry's dancing. Okay, I'm not gonna question it. So with that said, if you, watching this video, are also a YouTube creator and you happen to get sponsorships, chances are there are times when you really don't want to have to deal with the whole, ad read that you need to make. I mean, hell, you probably have your hands full enough with the video itself. So if you, like me, need to be able to focus on the bigger picture and you don't always have time to handle sponsorships, check out my website in the pinned comment or description and contact me. We can work together to keep your viewers entertained with a relevant, clean, and seamless segment. It occurs to me I don't think Henry can actually see me. Also, he kind of looks like he hasn't slept in 17 days. That's terrifying. I'm gonna wrap this up super quick. Here are just 3 examples of some of the work that I've done for another creator.
Resources, then waddled back over to my base to place them all down again. When I walked back inside my base, however, though, something felt different. Whoa, wait, hold up. Is that Light of Motirum?
Yes.
Well, that's terrifying. The Storm King has invaded LEGO Fortnite. While the Tyrannid untamed on day 3, I had to level up and unlock its saddle, and what better way to do so than grind out cooking pots? Oh man, that really hurt. Guess I was too in the zone with my music. These new Raycon earbuds are killer though.
Anyway, check out my website below so you can focus on what you do best, creating. Now back to hiding under the corpses. Yep. This is safe. This is sanitary. Good luck, Henry! Eventually, after wandering the ruined streets of Skalitz, you find your parents' dead bodies. You spend a bit mourning, and you bemoan the fact that they left you behind. You ask them to forgive you for everything and declare that you'll never run away again, and that you'll hunt down Markvart and avenge your parents. And then you set off to find a shovel and give your parents a proper burial under the linden tree, just like your father wanted. As you look around for a shovel, you come across one of the Deutsch's son's friends, Zbyszek, using a shovel to stave off a dog standing over the body of the butcher. Turns out the dog is the butcher's dog, and that Zbyszek was looting bodies, which aggroed the dog big time. Zbyszek gets increasingly aggressive, and when you ask him to lend you the spade, he demands that you trade it for Radzig's sword. When you refuse, he threatens to kill you, and you threaten him right back, to which he immediately runs off. Damn, Henry is actually starting to crash out.
Just woke up in a fucking steaming mood, yeah?
Later, while you're digging the hole, the butcher's dog comes up to keep you company. Aww.
I love you.
Once you finish digging, you head back to your parents' bodies and begin trying to lift them to no avail. Then a man calls out to you, snarkily asking if you need a hand. A group of ruffians surround you, Zbyszek with them. The leader, a man named Runt, engages you in combat and quickly overpowers you. He then takes your sword and gets ready to kill you with it, but a woman calls out to them.
Hey, go fuckers!
It's Teresa. The ruffians laugh at her, but then Robard and some soldiers charge in and begin slaughtering them, but unfortunately Runt escapes. You then get an opening credit sequence as you're laid in a cart and Teresa and Robard finish burying your parents. Robard and Teresa part ways back at Talmberg as Teresa carts you across the countryside through multiple towns and finally right outside of a town with a mysterious older man waiting for you both.
I feel quite hungry!
As you rest on the cart, you have another nightmare about the raid on Skalitz where you're being attacked by Runt and his crew. You wake up to Teresa hovering over you. Oh, hey, pretty lady. Turns out that she took you to her uncle's mill in Rete, and that she finished burying your parents for you. After drifting in and out of sleep, you finally wake up for good to find out that you've been recovering for 2 weeks. Wait, holy shit, 2 weeks? So you immediately set off for Rattay, where Sir Radzig is staying with Lord Hanish. You witness them discussing the politics behind the reason for the attack on Skalitz as you enter the dining hall, and Radzig and the other guests begin to berate you for ignoring his direct orders. You express your desire to get his sword back from Runt, but Radzig points out that you're severely under-equipped to be able to handle such a quest. Thus, you beg him to take you into his service, so one day you can enact your new revenge plot. Radzig considers it for a moment before deciding to take you into his service and letting you go after his sword, much to the other guests' surprise. Radzig decides your first task shall be working with Lord Hanish's city guard so that you can begin getting valuable experience. Firstly, though, you're supposed to meet with Captain Bernard and receive training before reporting to the bailiff. You arrive and begin training with Bernard before being interrupted by the arrival of one of the nobles from earlier named Sir Hans. He mocks the fact that you're just a blacksmith commoner before asking Bernard permission to use the archery range and leaving. After Bernard finishes teaching you the basics of swordsmanship, he then leads you to the archery range to practice that as well. After some practice shots, Sir Hans cuts in and belittles you, saying that you'll just simply run away and so there's no point to training you. You quip back, to which Bernard prepares to send you to the stocks for disrespecting a noble, but Hans decides to give you the chance to prove yourself and challenge him. After defeating him in archery, he begins making excuses and demands to challenge you in sword fighting as well. Once you proceed to wipe the floor with him during that too, he keeps his word and hands you his old bow before leaving. You return to Captain Bernard, who says he hopes that Hans hasn't taken your duel too personally before sending you to meet up with the bailiff. The bailiff tasks you to assist the town guard and to meet with a watchman nicknamed Nightingale over by the church who will oversee your training. After meeting up with the Nightingale, he asks about Teresa and the reason you're being trained before setting off with you to patrol the streets. After settling a dispute between a refugee and one of the merchants, you make your way to the front gate to check on the guards, only to find out that one of them went off to the tavern to drink, and so you both set off to track him down. Once you arrive, Nightingale begins tearing into him and screaming until he runs back to the gate. Once he leaves, you and Nightingale sit down, have a drink, and begin playing dice. As the sun begins to set, Nightingale gives you the final task of ringing the bell and ensures that the taverns close up for the night. When you ring the bell and arrive at the tavern, you find Hans and a few guards still drinking and chatting. As you try to ask them to leave, Hans drunkenly mocks you. You retort, to which he loses his temper, and you begin a brawl.
You can't talk to me like that. I'm a nobleman.
After kicking his ass, Lord Hanish shows up and scolds the two of you. Hans mentions that he plans to hunt tomorrow, so as punishment, Hanish orders you to tag along so that Hans can learn responsibility and you can learn to respect the nobles. The next morning, you meet up with Hans in the castle courtyard and you both set off. After arriving at the site, Hans explains that hunting isn't just about actually hunting things, but just being able to get away from Rattay and not having to deal with Hanish's lectures. He explains how stressful and boring it is to just have to listen to commoner disputes day after day. Hans in turn asks you about what happened at Skalitz, but you inform that it's too soon, bro, too soon. You both turn in for the night and plan to go hunting for real first thing in the morning. You do the ZZZ, and on said next morning, after some bickering, Hans challenges you to hare hunting, so you both set off in different directions. After you meet back up later, Hans compliments your abilities and you begin teasingly asking him about a reward, to which he mocks you and gives you some coin. I honestly love the dynamic between these two. You both then set off to track and hunt some larger game. After following Hans for a bit, you come across a boar. He prepares to shoot it with a bow, to which you express concern at the fact that boar hunting is usually done so with spears. Hans brushes your concern off and shoots it anyway. Afterwards, he teases you for doubting that he'd be able to bring the boar down with just an arrow, and then the boar suddenly leaps up and races off.
Fuck. After him. Fetch. Mount up, Henry. Chase down that swine.
Hans hops on his horse and chases after it, alongside his hunting dogs, and you follow them, but eventually lose sight, until you come across a Cuman camp where they've captured and tied up Hans. You swiftly dispatch the Cumans and save him, promptly helping him walk all the way back to Rattay, where he receives extensive first aid. It then jumps to Hanish and Radzig, expressing their concern at the fact that the Cumans were able to set up a camp so close to Rattay without being spotted. Hanish expresses his gratitude towards you for saving Hans' life. Radzig then tells you that he's decided to take you into his personal service and make you a squire. This lovely promotion is cut short though because Bernard suddenly storms in and informs the lords that some brigands have attacked the local stud farm and slaughtered almost everyone and everything. After Bernard gives what details he has, you realize that one of the attackers may also be the same man, Runt, who attacked you at Skalitz and stole your sword. You ask the lords to let you go with the knights to the stud farm, and they agree, also giving you your first horse. Let's go!
I feel quite hungry! Ah!
You meet Bernard in the court, mount up, and immediately set off to the stud farm in hopes of tracking down the attackers. When you arrive, the scene is horrific. There's blood and filleted bodies of both men and horses everywhere.
Crucifix? What kind of beast could do this?
The blood of the martyrs.
You find the owner's wife cradling her husband's lifeless body as she begins to explain what happened. Men in black snuck in at night, hamstringing the horses, slaughtering anyone they saw, and even attempting to burn down the farm. Bernard attempts to question her, asking her things like if her husband quarreled with anyone or if they stole anything, but she just reaffirms that these were random men who came just to kill, not steal. Bernard begins giving out orders to the men, and you beg him to let you try searching for the culprits as well, which he eventually allows. After tracking some spilled blood, you come across a clearing where two of the bandits talk about how they're going to kill the Ginger. You head back to inquire about him with the other workers, and once you make your way back, you find out that said Ginger ran off not long after you left. After pushing one of the workers more, you learn that he's befriended some of the local charcoal workers, so you set off to go track him down. After questioning the local charcoal burners, one of them suggests you follow the river to find the others in the area. You also learn that there's a pair of thugs asking around for him too, of course. Eventually you come across a charcoal burner who helps you find Mr. Ginger, and once you find him, he spills the beans. Turns out that the reason he ran and that there's thugs after him is because he recognized one of the bandits as someone from Ujits that has a limp and lives in a house at the edge of town. Okay. So you then return to the stud farm and report what you've discovered to Radzik. Afterwards, he tasks you with following your lead on the limping man from Ujits, so you set off immediately. Upon arriving at Ujits, you come across a commotion outside of one of the houses. The town officials try to shoo the townsfolk away and begin talking about how they might need to call upon Sir Hanish, to which you step in and introduce yourself while explaining your mission. They eventually let you in and open the door to the house, introducing the man with a limp as Limpy Lubosh. He's very dead, and I'm not showing this part because I like having monetization on my channel, and so here's a really pixelated version. See the full uncensored version on my OnlyFans. You begin interrogating the townsfolk and get another lead. Apparently Lubosh recently started going to church, so you head there to speak with the priest, a man named Godwin. Upon speaking with him, you learn that Lubosh had recently confessed everything that happened, but Godwin is forbidden from speaking about it because of the laws of confessionals. He instead suggests you meet at the tavern in the evening and figure out if there's a way he can still help. Upon meeting with him there, he asks you about your past and shares a bit of his before suggesting that you finish off the night by getting drunk. Very priestly of him. You respectfully turn him down, and after doing so, he refuses to help you at all, so you need to find another lead. You eventually learn about Lubosh's criminal record in Rete, so you see the scribe there in hopes of looking in the Black Chronicle, which allows you to learn more about Lubosh's past crimes. In exchange for helping him get a potion to help his aching joints, the scribe agrees to give you access to the Black Chronicle, and you learn that Lubosh had a friend named Riki who lives in some place called Ledishko. So you set off to find him. Once you arrive, you begin asking around and learn that Riki's actual name is Hinek, and that he's the tanner's son, and so you immediately head over to ask the tanner about him. My god, that's a lot of asking. Upon reaching the tanner and asking him about his son, he's extremely hesitant to give you any information, but eventually he explains that his son Riki has been poaching and has a super well-hidden hideout in the woods somewhere. He also mentions that Riki's been selling the poached meat to the innkeeper and that he's been seeing a girl at the bathhouse. So you begin questioning them and find out that his hideout is in a cave near the woodcutter's camp. After arriving at it, you find Riki inside and talk with him. He initially believes that you're there to kill him and that you're one of Runt's men, but you're able to convince him that you're not. It turns out that there were two gangs at the stud farm, Riki's gang and Runt's gang. Riki's gang only wanted to rob them, but Runt's group wanted to kill everyone. So they started arguing and Riki's gang took off, which caused Runt's gang to try and hunt them down. There were 4 members of Riki's gang: Riki, Timmy, Limpy Lubosh, and Pius Pavel. Lubosh is obviously very dead, and Riki has no idea where Pius went, but he's pretty sure that Timmy went back to the mill that he works at. After some pushing, he tells you that Timmy works at the mill to the north of Neuhof. And also, more importantly, that Timmy has been to Runt's camp with Pius before, so it's extremely important you get to Timmy before Runt's men do. As you get up to leave, though, you literally spot some of Runt's men, and as it turns out, they've just discovered Riki's hideout, so you both fight them.
Together, we stand a better chance.
Jesus Christ. Alright, I suppose you're right. You then rush over to the mill where Timmy works. Once you arrive and speak to the owner, he tells you that Timmy does indeed work there, but that he vanished a few days ago and that you should ask his sister Mirka that works there too. Initially, she tries to deny that she knows him at all, but after confronting her about the fact that everyone else knows him, she agrees to tell you, but only if you meet her behind the mill. When you meet up with her, she whispers that he's hiding at the Kolben farm by Merhoyet, before panicking and running away. As you turn around, you realize why. You're swiftly surrounded by a group of men who ask you about Timmy and what Mirka just told you. You're able to lie and convince them that he's in Rete, staying with the butcher, so they leave one of their men to keep watch of you while they go investigate. After dispatching him, you race to go find Timmy. And once you do, you ask him about Runt's camp, and after some convincing, he gives you directions on how to find it. You then report back to Radzig about what you discovered, and he asks you to scout the area out and perform some sabotage if you're able to, while in the meantime he musters his men to prepare to attack. You begin following Timmy's directions until you eventually find a clearing that reveals part of the wall and a man standing guard on the path. Sneaking around him through the brush, you make your way closer to the encampment and take brief notes of the fortification before immediately reporting back to Radzig on your findings. After telling him, everything you know, he tasks you with heading to Talmberg and requesting Sir Divish to bring all available men and to have him send a message to Sir Hanish to do the same. You rush to inform Divish and he agrees to send all his men, and you tag along with them to meet up with Radzig for the raid. After a brief discussion between Radzig and Robard, Radzig begins asking you for details about the camp so he can devise a proper plan to engage. After going through all the options, Radzig decides the best option will be to go over the narrow bridge because it'll allow your army to have the best positioning after you make it past. From there, you begin the battle. You fight your way across the bridge and up the hill into and through the camp, eventually making your way into the inner courtyard as your allies breach the door. Runt then calls out for his men to stand their ground before fleeing, and you chase after him. You catch up with him in the loft of a barn where you begin questioning him about where your sword is, and he expresses his surprise at the fact that you survived. You then promptly begin dueling. After you defeat him, you threaten him to tell you where your sword is, and as he mocks you, you begin bashing his head against the planks.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Before being interrupted by Radzig, and it's revealed that you accidentally killed Runt in your rage. Shit. Radzig mentions that the bandits had a trunk full of coin, and that someone highly placed in society is the cause of the group of bandits, and Runt was just a pawn. As the adrenaline wears off, you suddenly hurl over the side of the roof, and Robard consoles you. Radzig tells you that there will be a meeting in the upper castle in Rete to discuss what comes next, but he wants you to first get some rest and compliments you on your performance. As the camera pans out, you witness a mysterious man flanked by a pair of guards growl that he'll make you pay for this, as he tells one of the guards that it's time for the next part of their plan, and then storms off.
Hungry!
The next chapter begins with a cutscene where Captain Bernard is giving a briefing to Radzig and Hanish, informing them that there's been more attacks. Henry then arrives and Radzig tells him that he has another task for him. Bernard continues his briefing and mentions that the bandits attacked Merhoyed, but the villagers were able to fend the attack off and even took one of the bandits prisoner. Then Tobias, the master builder and chief engineer of Skalitz, arrives, and Hanish exclaims about how Tobias brings good news because he's carrying all of the coin that the bandits had at the bandit camp, and Hanish asks him how much there was. Tobias then informs him that the coins are in fact very well-made fakes, much to Hanish's dismay.
I don't give a fuck what you call them. I want to know what they're fucking worth.
That's just it, sir. They're worth nothing.
Tobias further explains that it'd take a well-hidden foundry, numerous craftsmen, and a whole source of materials. After learning this, Radzig tasks you with heading to Merhoyed and interrogating the captured bandit about where the others are hiding, how many there are, what their plans are, and any clues to the source of the counterfeit coins. After arriving at Merhoyed, you quickly learn that not only was there a bandit attack, but soon after a plague began appearing and affecting the townsfolk and the bandit you're supposed to interrogate. You meet up with the town chief, Melikar, and he informs you that if you help them solve the plague, then he'll allow you to interrogate the bandit. After asking around the village for symptoms, you head to the monastery to ask Johanka and Nicodemus for help in curing it. After talking with Nicodemus and reviewing a book that mentions numerous diseases, you learn that the bandits poisoned the water supply. Great. So you brew a kind of cure for the plague and help Nicodemus distribute it to the ill villagers. Melikar then finally lets you see the captive bandit. Said bandit informs you that he got his coin from Runt, and that Runt got it from a nobleman only known as the Chief, and the Chief was the one who had the coin minted. The Chief was also the one who ordered the bandits to attack Merhoyed, because he wanted to prove to the lords that he wasn't finished yet. He also tells you that he was the one who brought the counterfeit coin to the bandit camp, and that he doesn't know where it came from. He just got it from some merchant named Manhart that he met at the charcoal piles near Revna by the crossroad, and they're actually due to meet him there again soon. You then meet up with Radzig and inform him of all this stuff, which prompts him to task you with meeting up with Menhart and pressuring him to tell you what he knows about the counterfeit coins. After some brief philosophical words of wisdom, Radzig sends you off and mutters,
Good luck, son.
Why did he call us son? Is he trying to say that we are actually his son? What does this mean? As you arrive at the meeting place, you come across a scene of carnage, witnessing a broken wagon and the dead bodies of a couple guards. After investigating the scene, you come across a trail of blood and start to follow it back towards one of the charcoal burner camps. You then meet with the foreman and begin questioning him about the ambushed wagon, which he pretends to know nothing about. Henry, with his way with words, convinces the dude to spill it, and he reveals they looted the wagon and also rescued a wounded man who had begged them to hide him away. He then hands you the key to the shack where the man is resting, and you head over to interrogate him, which it then turns out that he's just a mercenary that Menhart hired for protection, and that they were attacked by a knight that was following them for a while. As you try to ask him for details about the knight, you hear commotion outside with somebody demanding to know where the coin is. You peek outside and witness the knight absolutely body the charcoal foreman
I don't know about any corners.
before grabbing the looted sack from the wagon, and as you burst out to confront him, he materializes on his horse and flees. Okay. After failing to catch up to him, you later find him at the tavern in Sasau and confront him. He tells you that he'll answer your question, but is afraid of being overheard, so he says to meet him at the pond after sunset by the big willow tree. Later that evening, you meet with him, but he's like, yeah, so I actually just wanted to kill you, and no matter how much you try and explain it's just a big old misunderstanding, he engages. After defeating him, you demand to know who he is and why he's ambushed the wagon. He introduces himself as Ulrich, and you reaffirm that you work for Radzig and that you're trying to investigate the counterfeit coin, to which he finally believes you. He makes a deal with you that if you introduce him to Master Tobias, he'll share with you all that he knows so far. The reason he needs Tobias is because Ulrich obtained a written confession including exactly how the counterfeit coins are made, but he doesn't understand the technicals behind it. He hands the confession to you and tells you to meet him in Sasau, where he'll continue investigating while you hand the confession to Tobias. After relaying all the information you learned and handing the document to Tobias, you learn that the counterfeits had been originating from the monastery near Sasau and that they're copper-coated in amalgam, a fusion of silver and quicksilver, which is very hard to obtain. Further, Tobias recognizes the handwriting and realizes it's written by the scribe of the Rosenbergs, a rival of Wenceslas, which makes them Radzig's enemy and explains why Ulrich is so mysterious and refuses to explain who he is. Tobias tasks you to head back to Sasau and look into the forges in the city to figure out who the hell is making the copper cores. He also says he'll meet up with you at the inn in Sasau after he sees Radzig. Back in Sasau, you relay to Ulrich what you've discovered, and he tells you what he's learned. He informs you that the people in the craftsman yard by the monastery are complaining because the blacksmith works till dawn, and also that a painter was complaining because he went to the monastery for quicksilver and it was all gone. Both of which are very strong leads to the origin of the copper cores and the amalgam coating. So you begin investigating. You start with questioning the painter, who informs you that the monastery overseer's assistant is the one who keeps telling him that there's no quicksilver, so you head over to him next. He tries to hide the reason that he doesn't have any, but after some good old threats, he spills that he didn't know it was for counterfeiting and that he was threatened by a knight by the name of Sir Jezik and a lackey by the name of Rapoda. They initially tried to bribe him, but when that didn't work, they resorted to threatening to reveal the fact that he's been stealing from the monastery. He tells you that he takes the quicksilver up to the nearby hill with a big tree and a small chapel where he usually meets up with Rapoda and exchanges it. Afterwards, you explain this to Tobias, and he suggests you investigate the hill, but also explains that he realized that they would need a punch die to make the counterfeit coins, which is extremely sophisticated. He knows of a man who works at the monastery yard by the name of Master Engraver Jerome of Cilicia. What the fuck are these names, bro? He further expresses that it could not have been Jerome who made the punch die because he knows him personally, but that he might have heard something, so you head over. Upon talking with Jerome, you learn that he has an apprentice named Florian, but that he's recently stopped showing up to work, claiming he's ill, and he's just kind of been acting really weird, mentioning that he's been getting followed. There was also some woman from the baths that came in screaming at him about a girl named Esther. You go and see the bath maid, who explains that it's Florian's fault that a man came into the baths and abducted Esther, and that the man shouted to the bath maid to tell Florian that when he wises up, he'll get Esther back. With that information, you go to see Florian, where you confront him about the punch dies, which he denies until you bring up Esther. He explains that he got threatened into helping them because they said they'd kill Esther otherwise, and that they'd have her locked up in the Skalitz Hills, saying that he'd be willing to tell you everything, but only if Esther is safe, so you set off to rescue her.
Well, I never.
Bang!
After saving her, you meet back up with Florian, who explains that Rapoda constantly stalks him, so you plan to confront Rapoda. Once you do confront him, he tries to run off, and you just tackle him. You demand to know the location of the goddamn workshop, which he explains is the Skalit's mines, and gives you detailed instructions of where to find it. He also mentions that Sir Jezik would meet with a Hungarian nobleman, sounds oddly familiar to the nobleman known as Chief, that one bandit told you about, but that he doesn't know anything else. You meet up with Ulrich again to tell him what you found out, and you both set off for the workshop together. Once you arrive, you fight your way past all the bandits and eventually make your way into the main cavern, where you find the full counterfeit operation. Sir Jezik tries to bribe you both, but Ulrich knocks him to the ground before getting ready to kill him. You stop the mad lad and explain that you have orders to take him to Rete, but he says that his orders are to kill everyone involved in the business. At an impasse, you fight once again. After killing Ulrich, you arrest Jezik and drag him to Master Tobias. Tobias congratulates you on the excellent work and tells you to head back to Rete and receive further instructions from Radzik. Once you arrive, Radzik informs you that Jezik refuses to talk to anyone but you, Henry, so he wants you to go down and question him. It turns out that he received his orders from someone only known as Eric, but that he's not the chief. Furthermore, you learn that this Eric is hiring armed men in Sasau, but Jezik doesn't know where they're gathering. You report back to Radzik on what you learned, and he tasks you to ask around Sasau and find the amassing army. You start with the Sasau bailiff, who informs you that there was a disturbance over by the tannery between the tanner and a few ruffians. Upon speaking with the ruffians, you find out that they do know something about the armed men being hired, but refuse to tell you anything because they don't trust you. So you decide to take their unarmed combat challenge. After beating all 5 of them, the leader tells you how to join up with Eric's group. He says that if there's a light in the church at night, go in and wait inside, and if they like the look of you, they'll give you work. Once you do so, you're cornered by a group of men, and the leader tells you that you have to pass a test before you can join up. He tasks you with killing a man named Pius, remember the leader of Lubosh, Riki, and Timmy's group? Yeah, that Pius, because apparently he betrayed them and is now holed up inside of the monastery. The only ways to get to him are to sneak in or to become a monk. The leader mentions that there's some man hanging around the Sasau taverns who's supposed to join the monastery soon and suggests you somehow take his place. Before the leader heads out, he tells you to make sure you take Pius's special dice off his body as proof that you killed him, and that once you do, you should head to the swamp near the monastery and light a fire, suggesting that the bandits would, then meet up with you then. You report back to Radzik about what you just learned and the robbers' task for you involving Pius. Radzik expresses his regret at the fact that he can't do anything to help due to the fact that his relationship with the monastery isn't cordial and that you're on your own. He tells you not to kill Pius, and that if you find him, to capture him and bring him to the bailiff in Rete so that he can be interrogated and given a fair trial. You then head over to the Sasau Tavern, where you meet the young man who's going to join the monastery soon, as he's being accompanied by a guard named Manfred to make sure he actually joins the monastery. After pickpocketing the writ of admittance to the monastery off Manfred, you meet with Brother Porter, who tells you to put away all your possessions, put on the monk robes, and rest while Porter prepares everything. Once you do, Porter guides you into the cloister, where there's a mass taking place, where you'll then say your vows. You then gesture to stand next to the other novices, 4 in total, and Pius is one of them. But see, you don't know which one he is. The mass is being led by the prior, who gives a speech before singing in Latin and then pausing. The novice next to you then tries to guide you through your part, and what follows is probably one of the funniest cutscenes in the entire game.
These are the cornerstones and succor of our order, which on this day shall become your own. Et non confundas me ab expectatione mea. Suscipe me, Domine, secundum. Welcome, brother.
The prior renames you as Brother Gregor. And congrats! You joined the church! The novice who helped you with your vows introduces himself as Antonius and explains that he's been tasked to guide you and to explain to you your duties. Thus begins one of the most annoying quests in a game I've ever played. You start with nothing but your monk robes and have to figure out which of the novices is pious while also following the strict schedule. I struggled with it for hours before eventually giving up and just Googling who pious is. And surprise, surprise, it's Goody Two-Shoes Antonius, who you confront about the fact that he's actually pious. He tasks you with getting some blood and the keys to the place so that you can fake his death, and then you both leave together. After getting them, Pius tells you to meet him after evening mass on the dormitory balcony. Once there, he sets up the scene to make it look like a brutal murder, and then together the two of you sneak out through the construction area of the monastery, and hey, you're home free! You stop him before he leaves and tell him that you've been given orders to actually take him to the bailiff for what he did at the stud farm, and so he begins attacking you. A perfectly reasonable response. Once he's defeated, you drag him back to Rete, and with that, your task is done. You head to the swamp, light the fire, and wait. You continue waiting for so long that you eventually doze off before being woken up by the ruffian leader who has just surrounded you. He asks if you have proof, and when you mention that you don't, he decides to just kill you. After fighting them all off, you ask the innkeeper in Sasau if he's heard anything about a large encampment nearby, and he informs you that a drunk passerby told him about how he saw a camp at the old stronghold, Ranik. Having learned this, you head back to Hanish and Radzig and inform them of what you've just learned. They then task you to infiltrate and scout out the camp before immediately reporting back so that they can devise a plan to attack. Once you get inside, the gatekeeper tells you that you should really report back to Eric at the top of the hill. You meet with Eric, and after some questions, he sends you to meet their combat master Vaniak to find out how good you are. Once you arrive, you recognize him as the man who taught you sword fighting back in Skalitz before the raid. After defeating him, he sends you back to Eric to tell him that you have what it takes.
I went to the fight master as you ordered.
You enter Eric's office as he's meeting with someone, and you begin updating him on what happened before you stop short as you recognize the man he's talking to. It's the noble that Radzig met with back in Skalitz before the raid. The noble also has Radzig's sword, and you piece together that this man is the chief that was giving orders to Runt. Before you can attack him, you're knocked out. Shit! You wake up and the noble begins mocking you before revealing to you that you're Radzig Kobula's bastard.
You even know him. It's your liege lord, Radzig Kobula.
He also reveals that he works for Sigismund and that his plan is to take over the realm and become its new lord, and then he leaves you to be tortured by one of his henchmen. Later, you wake up to someone calling your name and trying to get you to wake up, and who hands you water. As your eyes focus, you realize that the man is Zibishek, the one who was robbing the dead back in Skalitz, and is literally the reason that Run stole your sword. He then tells you to keep quiet, and that he's your only chance to get out of here alive while untying you. He explains that the only way out of this place is where they throw waste over the wall. So he suggests that you both jump down, and that the pile of shit is so high that it'll mean you have a soft landing. After getting out and meeting up with Zibishek, he helps carry you back to Rete. It then cuts to Radzig and Hanish as Hanish teases him about you being his son before you and Zibishek barge into the room.
Father?
I told you he had balls.
You tell him that the chief is the Hungarian noble that Radzig was hosting before Sigismund pillaged Skalitz, and Radzig reveals him as Sir István Toth. Radzig surmises the best course of action would be to attack him tomorrow night, which is as soon as they can be ready, and he tasks you with riding to Talmberg as soon as possible, telling Divish to gather his men and to meet them at Ranik tomorrow evening. Before you leave, Radzig stops you and apologizes that István was the one to tell you that Radzig's your father, and that you'll talk about it when everything's over, but for now, you have to stop István. And with that, you leave and get ready to depart for Talmberg. Rushing your way over to Talmberg, you meet with Sir Divish and inform him of Radzig's plan, and that he needs to send all his able-bodied... Wait, this is sounding really familiar. Divish orders Robard to only leave just as many men as would be needed to guard the castle, and so Divish, Robard, and you set off to meet Radzig's group outside of Ranik. After some brief discussion on the best strategy, the nobles agree to start by burning the enemy tents with flaming arrows and charging in with a frontal assault at the same time, while Robart sneaks in behind with a small group of men to catch the enemy by surprise. And so you begin your attack.
They may be hiding behind a stockade, but they are still a pack of curs who are no match for men like you. And tonight, we are going to festoon these trees with corpses. First, we will set fire to the little hornet's nest, then we'll keep them busy by the gate, and when we've made it nice and hot for them, Sir Robard and his men will pounce on them from the rear, and we will hack them to pieces. Have you got it? Yes, sir! Good.
Assemble.
After breaching the gate, you and the soldiers charge inside and begin engaging the bandits. After the dust clears, Hanush begins raving, demanding to know where Istvan Toth is, and ordering everyone to look around for clues. You find a letter on Eric's desk, and after handing it to the lords, Radzig begins reading it aloud. Turns out that Istvan's plan was to capture a castle, but they don't know which one. At that moment, Robart appears with a captured bandit who begins mocking the lords and hinting about the castle before Divish quickly realizes that he might be talking about Talmberg.
Talmberg. You'll never get him. You'll never get.
What? So your group mounts up and begins rushing back to Talmberg before it's too late. The chapter begins with an epic cutscene where Divish and the rest of you are desperately trying to ride back in time. You see Istvan trick the Talmberg guards into opening the gate and Lady Stephanie being taken hostage before the rest of Istvan's men rush inside and take control of the castle. You finally arrive just in time to witness the dead guards being tossed out of the castle, and Divish gives the order to charge.
Quickly! Follow me!
You rush your way into the outer bailey and briefly see your father rush inside the castle as the outer gate is shut behind you, trapping everyone inside. After killing all of Istvan's men in the outer bailey, you witness a cutscene where your men are making their way to the drawbridge and the gate begins closing before stopping. Your men erupt in cheers and charge in, only to be stopped by the sight of Istvan appearing, holding Lady Stephanie hostage and also revealing that Radzig's been captured as well. Divish demands to know what Istvan wants, and in response, Istvan tells him that there's nothing he wants except for you all to die, before ordering his men to fire and burn it down, to which one of his men opens fire on Divish and he's struck with an arrow. As you all begin to flee, a flaming arrow hits one of the houses in the outer bailey, and soon all of the houses are alight. Back outside the castle, you begin discussing and going over what just happened. Hanush tells Divish that they must lay siege to the castle, but Divish expresses dismay at the idea and insists that that's their last resort. Robart chimes in and suggests that a small group sneaks their way inside to perform a night raid, and you volunteer to go.
I'll go.
The chapter begins with Robart giving a rundown of the plan. Whoa, is that Geralt of Rivia? Robart expresses that your primary objective is to free the hostages so Toth can't use them against you. He also goes over that if the enemy sounds the alarm, then you are to retreat immediately, and he also reveals that Hans will be joining the raid as well.
You've laid out my bare nips and my titties for the world to see, and that's fine by me.
Then your group sets off. After scaling the walls, you're tasked with taking out the two guards by the portcullis. You're able to take out the first one, but as you go stealth kill the second one, he's able to get free and the alarm is sounded, forcing you and the rest of the men to flee. Damn, that was kind of uneventful. Robart and Divish stand atop a hill going over their options for taking back Talmberg, as Robart states that they can only take Talmberg by a ruse or with superior numbers, but that their ruses have failed and that they don't have superior numbers. Divish surmises that their only course of action is to build a trebuchet. So he sends for Tobias and...
You will build me a trebuchet, Master Tobias.
Trebuchet, my lord. That's not entirely in my field of expertise.
You meet with Tobias later, and he asks you to fetch a man named Conrad Kaiser, who recently came to Sasau. Turns out that Conrad had designed siege engines and even took part in a siege before with Sigismund, so Tobias wants to recruit him to help build the trebuchet. After helping him with an issue, he agrees to go to Talmberg with you, and it jumps to a cutscene where Conrad is asking the group about their plan on how to take the castle. Tobias emphasizes that they wish to strike the gate so as to not damage the castle more than is necessary, and Conrad immediately gets to work constructing the trebuchet. After the trebuchet is finished, they begin their first test launch.
That's the cutest fucking thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
Not long after, a messenger comes rushing in to inform Sir Divish that an army is coming that's flying the colors of Havel Medic, an old enemy of Sir Divish. Robart and Divish surmise that Havel's army is coming to help Istvan. Divish begins devising a plan to wipe out Istvan's reinforcements before he even knows that they're there. Later, when you ask him if you can join the Skalit's men, Divish goes a step further and puts you in charge of the ambush group since he's wounded and Radzig is captured. After meeting up with your group, you wait for the enemy to approach before ambushing their flank group. Once the enemy is defeated, Hanush comes back with the enemy commander, and it's revealed that it's Eric, the same man that was in charge of the bandits back in Vranik. Right as you explain who he is to Divish, Robart comes running and explains that a group of Istvan's men came out of Talmberg and are trying to destroy the trebuchet, so you rush to protect it. After defeating the invading force, everyone erupts in cheers as Conrad inspects the trebuchet for damage. Robard suggests firing it now, but Divish disagrees, expressing his concern that Istvan might hurt Radzig and Stephanie. You chime in and suggest that you exchange hostages since your group captured Eric, who's obviously important to Istvan. Divish agrees and compliments you before telling you to meet him in his tent later to help interrogate Eric once you've rested. You begin interrogating him and find out that Istvan's parents were killed by the Turks, so Istvan ended up joining Sigismund and was assigned with the task of destroying Wenceslas's allies. Later, Divish and Hanush parley with Istvan in an attempt to convince him to exchange hostages, but he angrily refuses and states that if Eric is harmed at all, he's going to brutally hurt Radzig and Stephanie. Robard insists that they lay siege and that the hostages will be fine, and Hanush agrees, pointing out that they don't really have enough supplies to wait Istvan out. At that moment, a messenger appears and informs them that Margrave Jobst, Sigismund and Wenceslas's cousin, is coming soon and wants to speak with them. Apparently, last year Jobst was sided with Sigismund and his allies, but has recently switched sides and appointed himself as the leader of the rebellion against Sigismund. Now knowing that Jobst is on his way, Divish finally gives in and agrees that laying siege to the castle is the only way now. After waiting a bit for everything to get ready, you meet up with Robard and immediately begin the attack on Talmberg. Divish gives the signal to which the trebuchet launches a round which perfectly hits the portcullis, causing the gate to drop. Your group makes their way to the walls and begin climbing up the ladders onto the wall. Once there, you begin working to clear the battlements with Captain Bernard, and once you're done, you make your way to the courtyard where the rest of the group is finishing off the last of Istvan's men. Having defeated all of his men, Istvan is holed up in the tower with Radzig and Stephanie and refuses to surrender. Hanush promises safe passage as long as Istvan releases the hostage, but Istvan counters that he'll release Stephanie now, but is going to hold on to Radzig until he reaches Skalitz. With no other options, Radzig convinces Hanush to agree. Before leaving, Istvan taunts you with your father's sword and then rides off. Hans then urges you to ride with him after Istvan to go retrieve your father. After having made your way to Skalitz, you find Radzig chilling in the middle of the field, and you ride up to meet him. Hans leaves the two of you to catch up, and in the meantime, he and the rest of the men will chase after Istvan. Radzig explains to you that he and your mother hooked up when they were young, but Radzig wasn't able to marry a commoner. Later, Martin appeared and married your mother and took you in as his own, but Radzig always kept an eye on you. You express your desire to get your father's sword back and to get revenge on Istvan and Markvart. But Radzig tries to reassure you that there's more to life than just revenge and hate and not get consumed by it.
Blue skies overhead, green grass underfoot, beautiful girls. Good wine, a few good friends, and a fine steed under your backside. Those are things worth living for. Though I can't deny that swine who killed your mother must pay for what he did. But it's better not to dwell too much on that at the cost of those other things.
You then set off to head back together. As you're making your way back, you see a group of horsemen riding back, and it turns out that it's Margrave Jobst's entourage. It then cuts to you sitting underneath a tree somewhere with a dark sky. It's playing the Johanka Heretic DLC for some reason. And Martin appears beside you. He sits down next to you and reassures you that you couldn't have saved him or your mom, and that you did the right thing, before telling you he has to leave you now. He starts walking towards your mom, who's standing in front of a bright glow, and tells you to make her proud before taking her hand and walking off into the light. You wake up to one of the Skalitz guards shaking you, and he informs you that Radzig wants you to meet him at the upper castle and that he and the other lords are meeting with Jobst. On your way to the meeting, you see Hans, who informs you that they weren't able to catch Istvan, and you both head up to see Jobst. Inside the chambers, you're introduced to Margrave Jobst and a member of his council, John of Liechtenstein. With introductions out of the way, Jobst gets down to business. Turns out that Wenceslas initially asked Sigismund for help restoring order, and Sigismund assumed that if he helped Wenceslas, that Wenceslas would have just let him become the king of the Romans and leave the actual reign of Bohemia and the empire to him, essentially just making Wenceslas the puppet king while Sigismund does the actual ruling. Jobst further explains that everything's gotten to the point where even the League of Lords, a group of lords that pledge their loyalty to Sigismund, are beginning to realize that Sigismund really wasn't the right choice. Radzig questions Jobst on if he knows the true position of the League of Lords, to which Jobst explains that he's not on good terms with them. Hans enthusiastically expresses the idea of him going to von Berghoff himself and getting a direct answer on how they stand. The lords all agree, and Hans further requests that you go along with him. And Radzig agrees that you're a very good investigator and a bodyguard. Jobst also tasks John with going to Kuttenberg and investigating, so Jobst can get an even better idea as to the situation of things. With that settled, Hanush and Jobst begin composing a letter for Berghoff, and you see your father before setting off. Hans takes the letter, and you both begin your next grand adventure. Wait, what do you mean I have to help you find love before we can set off? You have any fucking idea how long it took to play this game? So, it turns out that Hans is in love with Carolina, the butcher's daughter, and we gotta help him woo her before he'll let us set off. Let's get this over with. The first step is he wants you to get his great-grandmother's necklace, which ends up leading to a murder mystery and an epic dice tournament hosted by a robber baron, but finally, with that said and done, you have the necklace in hand and go return it to Hans. He then tasks you with sneaking the necklace and a letter into this girl's trunk while she's sleeping. After doing so and reporting back to him, he wants one final thing before finally confessing his love to her. There's a man in Sasau selling something called the Musk of Infinite Allure, and Hans wants you to get it. After convincing the con man to give it to you, God, this is just the fetch quest of all fetch quests, you give it to Hans, and finally, it's time for him to confess his love to Carolina. Well, with you prompting him poetry from the nearby bush, of course. He tells you to see him later once it's time to begin, so you do, and, well, it turns out that the potion gave Hans an allergic reaction and his face is covered in hives. After quickly handing him a marigold decoction and him recovering, you set off to help him woo Carolina. Thus begins one of the best scenes in the entire game.
Who's there? I can't see you.
Your most ardent admirer, fair maid.
Uh-huh. And do you have a name?
What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would still be a flower, wouldn't it? Start.
Gentle night, why linger on? I yearn thus for my love so long. Without her words to still my breast, who shall set my soul to rest?
Gentle night, why linger on? I earned this from my love so long. Whip out your worthy silky breasts. Who shall suck my salty bits?
No!
No, yeah. I'm a heard that bag. I seen some of these documentaries. I ain't believing none of that. Hey, the game government ain't no getting no one in the sample. No, give my 3D.
I have no idea what the fuck you're saying right now.
After Hans absolutely brutalizes your poetry, the butcher comes out and Hans begs for you to cover for him while he sneaks into Carolina's room and serenades her more.
Untie it.
Don't try to make a fool of me. I heard it clearly. What was that?
Are you alright? It seems to me you're hearing things other folk can't hear.
After absolutely gaslighting the hell out of him, eventually you're not able to fool him into thinking there's no noise anymore, so what should you do in that situation but just start singing as loud as you can? With the butcher finally gone, you return back to the castle the next morning to meet up with Hans and see how everything went. Afterwards, you get a funny scene of Hanush losing his mind because the butcher came to blackmail him about it. Then Hans materializes in his armor and you can finally set off on your quest, for real this time. So here we go, directly into the next game. Adentus Fortuna Iva. Wait, why did this game just call me a virgin? Why do only 1% of players have this achievement? What the fuck? Alright, so if you're, like me, very confused by this point about the overall historical explanation of who all these different characters are, namely the ones we mostly don't see on screen, like powerful leaders such as Wenceslas and Sigismund, allow me to explain very briefly before we continue on to the behemoth that is KCD2. Here's the deal, basically. A while back, there was a really cool emperor called Emperor Charles IV. He made the people of Bohemia and the Holy Roman Empire very happy. Things were good. He had a few sons. For now, we'll focus on just the main two, Wenceslas and Sigismund. They're half-brothers. Eventually, Emperor Charles died, and Wenceslas initially took over as the new king, being the oldest. Sigismund, on the other hand, became the king of Hungary, and so each brother had their own shit to rule. Eventually, people were really annoyed by Wenceslas because he wasn't a great leader, he was just kind of on that brain rot shit. So Sigismund came in to help out, thinking maybe he'd just take over some control and become more powerful. They also had two cousins who were brothers, Prokop and Jobst. Prokop sided with Wenceslas, while Jobst sided with Sigismund, but later, after Prokop and Wenceslas were imprisoned due to Jobst's efforts, Jobst, for unknown reasons, switched sides and announced himself leader of the resistance against Sigismund and led efforts to restore Wenceslas to power. That brings us to the end of KCD 1. Jobst has tasked you, Henry, to be the bodyguard of Hans, as you, Hans, and a group set out to deliver a message to Sir Otto von Berghoff, the head of the League of Lords, to ascertain their overall current stance. So, with that said, let's get right into KCD 2.
Females! Let's go to them.
The game begins with a castle under siege as the defenders are desperately trying to hold out. Godwin, the drunk priest from Ujitz back in the first game, starts walking down the stairs and across the courtyard. The commander orders you to the battlements to help defend it, but not before someone calls out to you and you see Hans helping carry a wounded man. Godwin and Hans have an absolute bro moment before being interrupted by someone screaming, "Trebuchet!" as it fires and knocks out the portcullis, causing the drawbridge to fall, and the enemy then rushing to begin charging the gate. You take control of Godwin as you defend the ramparts from the enemy invaders. Damn, I suck at the crossbow. Before the enemy makes a charge at the gate, and you rush down to help the defenders in the courtyard. You then follow the commander, finally being introduced as Dry Devil, up to the side ramparts and begin knocking down the enemy ladders and clearing the battlements. Hans is then struck in the shoulder by an arrow. As Godwin helps to try and get it out, Hans bemoans the fact that they were only supposed to deliver a message to Trusky. Overall, an absolute Giga Chad way to open the game. We then cut to a green field with the text several weeks earlier, as you see Henry, Hans, Henry's dog, and their entourage galloping across the countryside before a pair of the men ahead call out that they can see Trusky. Henry and Hans pick up the pace until they reach the top of the hill and stand in awe of the sight before them. You take control of Henry as you and Hans have a discussion about the reason Hanish sent you both on this errand rather than go himself. Eventually, you make your way near a lakeside before being confronted by a group of horsemen from Trosky who quickly surround you. The leader of the horsemen, a man by the name of Captain Thomas, questions who you are and your purpose for being here. Hans answers his questions, but Thomas quickly begins taking on a hostile tone and remarks that they're enemies, causing Hans to freeze up, so you take over. You explain that you're here as a peace envoy, and eventually Thomas backs down. He further explains that they won't be able to escort you back because they're after the bandits, and also that you won't make it to the castle before nightfall, and Sir Otto won't allow anyone to be admitted after dark. After Hans blatantly insults Thomas,
What kind of a backwater have they sent us to?
the man sets off after the bandits, and your group begins to make camp by the lakeside so you can bathe and be presentable to Sir Otto tomorrow. While sitting around the campfire, your companions will ask a series of questions about recent events, and depending on your answers, you get a buff in that respective skill, similar to the first game. Afterwards, you and Hans get ready to bathe in preparation for tomorrow, and as you crawl into the pond, you hear the voices of women giggling in the distance, much to Hans' delight, of course.
What's the matter?
Females! Let's go to them.
You get a quick tutorial on stealth, including a new mechanic of throwing stones to distract enemies, and eventually make your way to where the women are hanging out. After watching them for a few moments, they suddenly get quiet as you slowly hear the clanking of steel and men screaming, and you both realize that your camp is being ambushed by bandits. You witness all of your companions being quickly outnumbered and slaughtered one after another, and then two men grabbing one of the women and trying to drag her off. Hans begs you to do nothing and just run away, but you call out to distract them anyway. The leader orders his men to charge after you, some firing arrows while you and Hans both swim away. But you're shot in the shoulder before you can get away, and you're just barely able to make it to the other bank. As you and Hans are beginning to run off into the forest, you look back at the leader and another man on horseback. Wait, is that fucking Ishvan Toth? You and Hans sneak your way around the forest, just narrowly avoiding being detected by the bandits. As Hans slides down a slope and you're about to follow, you're grabbed by a bandit and pulled into battle, with literally the objective survive. You desperately fight before your dog comes rushing in and distracts the enemy long enough for you to grapple him. As you both struggle, eventually you slip and both of you go tumbling over the edge of a cliff. The screen cuts to black as you hear Martin's voice ring out some of the last words he told you before that fateful day in Skalitz. You come to in that weird black sky hillscape again, and you're joined by Martin. After briefly chatting, you get this really cool transitional scene as you wake up for real.
So pull yourself together and wake up.
It's not over yet. For the love of God, wake up. Pull yourself together, Henry.
You come to with Hans standing over you, now dressed in the clothes of the dead bandit you were just struggling against. He then helps you up and supports you as you continue trying to get away from the bandits. As Hans is dragging you along, you begin hallucinating the massacre of Skalitz. Just as you're starting to collapse and give up, Hans sees a light and drags you towards it. It ends up being a hut, and you burst inside. An old lady calls out, asking if it's someone called Pavleva, and Hans reassures her that you both mean her no harm and that you need medical attention. The old lady agrees, but at that moment, one of the bandits comes storming in, and him and Hans struggle before Hans NFL tackles him out of the house and you lose consciousness again. You then dream of the events after your parents die, up till Mr. Clean introduces himself as Markvart von Aulitz, before waking up. As you get up, you see Hans laying in the corner, wounded and unconscious. The lady reassures you that he's alive and he just barely made it, and then introduces herself as Bojena. She then tasks you with gathering some herbs so she can brew some medicine for Hans, and also says that you should bury the body of the dead bandit. After doing so, you head back to the hut, but hear some kind of commotion. Turns out that a couple of armed men, most likely more bandits, had come looking for the two of you and demanded to know where you are. After tricking them and sending them on a wild goose chase, you talk with Bojena and explain to her what happened. You're then given a brief reintroduction to alchemy, and afterwards Bojena sends you to get some rest. As you sleep, you're given more snippets of Istvan Toth and your father's sword before being woken up by a young woman this time. It turns out that she's Pavlena, Bojena's daughter, and she informs you that Hans is up and completely fine now. You head outside to join them for breakfast and share some tales of yours and Hans' past adventures, before eventually it's time to leave. Bojena hands you some groschen and food for the journey, and you set off. Eventually, you make your way to Trotsky Castle and head up to the gate. Hans bangs on the gate and demands entry, but the guard throws a bucket of literal shit on him. Turns out they don't believe your envoys because you're dressed poorly, so you try to convince them that Captain Thomas can attest to who you are because he met you by the pond. You then learn that Thomas was also ambushed by the bandits and has been delirious ever since, so they tell you to get lost. With no other options, you head back to the town and wash up as... Anyway, the innkeeper appears and asks if you have any groschen, and when you hand her the money Bojena gave you, she informs you that all that it'll afford is a single bowl of gruel. Hans demands she brings them some decent food and promises to settle later, to which she does. Hans demands you come up with some kind of plan, and you suggest that you work to earn enough groschen to get new clothes and to bathe. Hans balks at the idea of working and is pessimistic about your situation, but you do your best to cheer him up as the innkeeper brings you some food. After she sets it out, she informs you both to report for work afterwards. Not long after, something catches your attention, and as you turn and look, you see the woman from the lake you helped save. Realizing she can vouch for who you are, you go up to speak with her, and as it turns out, her name is Catherine.
Oh my. Ugh. Can you smell that too?
Oof. It stinks like something died here.
She adamantly denies knowing you and that she was never at the pond. What an absolute gaslighting girl boss. Before leaving, she does inform you that von Berghoff's getting ready to ride out, and that if you want to speak with him, the best place would be at Samin's wedding. You're then approached by the innkeeper, who informs you that you both will be working off your debt and tasks you with carrying sacks of flour inside. You ask her about Samin's wedding, and you learn that Lord Samin's son, Olda, is marrying the daughter of the local bailiff. Further, the bride's brother is actually here right now, and so you return back to Hans. You tell him the details about the wedding, and also that the innkeeper wants you both to carry in some sacks of flour, and that she'll then call your debt even. Hans refuses to help you because he's a noble and thinks that it'll somehow disgrace him if someone later recognizes him and realizes that he lugged sacks around. No matter how much you try, you can't convince him and are then forced to carry them alone. As you slowly begin carrying the sacks to the pantry, Hans immediately starts picking a fight with the future bride's brother. During their argument, you learn the best way to get invited to the wedding would be to help the blacksmith or the miller.
Take your ragamuffin friend and get the fuck out of our village.
Jesus. I can't believe him.
Eventually, tensions boil over and a brawl breaks out. Then the guards show up and grab you and Hans. As the guard reaches for Hans, Hans punches him too, leading to you both being thrown in the stocks. As you're having rotten fruit thrown at you, you berate Hans for acting like a spoiled brat. He in turn tries to blame everything on you saving that girl by the lake and calls you just a simple peasant. As you're finally being let out of the stocks the next morning, you see von Berghoff riding off. Afterwards, Hans decides to go off on his own and leaves you behind. Now left on your own, you decide to pay the blacksmith a visit and help him out so you can get invited to the wedding. He's willing to take you on as his apprentice, but first he gives you a couple of tests, and after you pass them, he gives you one final task before he'll take you on as his apprentice. Apparently his two previous assistants were taking a cart full of supplies to Samin and never returned, so he tasks you with heading to Samin and finding out what happened to them. When you arrive, you're hassled by a group of drunken revelers, and one of them starts a fight with you. After kicking his ass, you're interrupted by a man who ends up being the guard captain of Samin, Gnarly, who walks you up to meet with Lord Jan Samin, who is surprised at the fact that it's just you and was under the impression that you are arriving with his cart. After you explain that you've been sent after the missing cart and the two missing hands, he informs you that they never arrived. Jan and Gnarly plan to set off, but Gnarly insists that you come along and help out, so the three of you set off. After some asking around, you're able to get on the trail of the wagon, and after searching for a while, you're able to find the wagon hidden away along the path. As you follow the path, eventually you hear the noises of men laughing and talking. Jan tasks you with scouting, and when you do, you find out that it is a scouting group of bandits. Returning back to Jan and Gnarly, you devise a plan of attack and kill the bandits. Afterwards, the three of you get into position to spy on the main group of bandits. There, you learn that the cart hands were actually working with the bandits and stole the supplies. You and Jan go to confront the bandits, and when it fails, Gnarly shoots one of them with a crossbow, during which one of the blacksmith hands sneaks off. After you defeat the bandits, Gnarly sends you to chase after the one that fled. You convince him to surrender, and Jan tells you that he'll take care of the rest. You can report back to the blacksmith. When you inform him of what happened and that everything's been resolved, he agrees to take you in as his apprentice and tasks you with getting a broken Toledo sword from an old hermit named Ambrose, so he can use it as a base for the sword of Samin's wedding present. When you initially talk to the hermit, he refuses to have anything to do with you, but after some investigating, you find out that the hermit is actually a former member of the Knights of the Cross with the Red Star, and not Ambrose. It turns out that the real Ambrose died a while ago, and the hermit, Conrad, took his place. He also tells you that Ambrose's sword is on his grave like a cross, and he promises to tell you where it is after you help him with a series of tasks. After finally retrieving the sword, you return to the blacksmith and you get to work forging the new sword. Once it's finished, you ask the blacksmith if you can go with him to the wedding, and he agrees, but only if you dress fancily. After donning a set of spiffy new clothes, you and the blacksmith finally set off for the wedding. You arrive and see that von Berghoff's chamberlain is here, but also notice that Hans is here as well, and he refuses to talk to you. After doing a series of side activities, including a dice tournament, dueling, and making sure one of the guests doesn't get drunk, all that's left is to wait for von Berghoff to arrive and for the wedding to start. Except, as the evening draws on, von Berghoff never arrives. With no other choice, Samin begins the wedding without him. With the wedding drawing to a close, you give up hope of seeing von Berghoff and decide to congratulate the newlyweds and then leave. Eventually you find the bride sobbing in the basement. It turns out that right after the wedding, the groom got a message from a messenger and then immediately rode off with him. As you comfort her, one of the guests comes in and thinks that you're trying to seduce the bride, so he kicks you back into the courtyard. At that moment, Hans comes in and out of nowhere clocks the guy who attacked you. After some teasing, he pulls you up and a giant brawl takes place. Dude, what is with Hans in starting brawls? What the fuck, Hans? It's then interrupted by the chamberlain who orders the guards to put a stop to the brawl. Then we come back to the town of Ujitz from the first game, where you see Father Godwin having just finished interesting activities. You watch him dig around his home, which is in a complete state of disarray, before being interrupted by somebody entering. It turns out to be Radzig and Hanish. After some brief conversation, you learn that Godwin's been kicked out of his rectory and that they've come because they have a mission for him. They task him with going to Trotsky and finding out what happened to you and Hans and bringing the both of you back. The chapter begins with you and Hans locked inside a dungeon cell. As you sit there, Hans begins apologizing for his behavior and you both catch up to what the other's been up to recently. Hans mentions that he was hunting, and when you remark that it's poaching and the fact that it's a capital crime, he shrugs it off as not a big deal. At that moment, you hear the guards talking about Captain Thomas and how he's slowly recovering, but also that he has a fever. Hans tries to convince the guards again that you're messengers and the door to the cell opens, only for them to inform you that they're gonna make you work off your crime. Oh, and also, Hans is now scheduled for execution for poaching because the guards heard him brag about it. Nice job, Hans.
I'd like to make use of the bathhouse's services.
And what is it you'd like?
You're now in a race against time to get to the captain before Hans is scheduled to be executed. Initially, you're tasked with carrying charcoal and are only allowed access to the main courtyard, but through helping the different staff of the castle, you're able to eventually gain access to the alchemy station and even the chapel where Captain Thomas is resting. When you go to enter the alchemy room, you find Catherine digging through one of the chests. After confronting each other, she eventually relents and helps you find a chest of potions that'll be beneficial for helping the captain. Once you make your way up to the chapel, you find Thomas asleep and his sister taking care of him. You inform her that you have something to help his fever, and as she administers it to him, you hear the bells tolling. The scene cuts to Hans being led out of the dungeon as the Chamberlain eggs on the crowd. Eventually, Hans is brought to the gallows and stood on the log with a noose around his neck. As the Chamberlain prepares to lace sentence, he's interrupted by you rushing and carrying Captain Thomas. You try to explain that he can't hang him because he's a noble, and Thomas can testify as to your identities. Chamberlain orders the guards to seize you, and he gives the order for Hans to be hung. All hope seems lost, and in that moment, the horns sound announcing the arrival of Sir Otto von Berghoff. He orders for Hans to be taken down so that he can pass judgment, and it also turns out that von Berghoff is hurt. Later, you meet with him in his office to introduce yourselves, and he informs you that he was also ambushed by bandits, and almost everyone except him died.
And this is Henry of Skalitz, my escort.
Welcome to Trotsky, gentlemen.
As you and the Chamberlain make amends, Hans explains the reason for their visit and informs von Berghoff that the Lords of Lipa want to open discussions with him and the League of Lords because the situation has grown out of hand. Von Berghoff agrees that it may be time to open relations, but the bandit situation is still too pressing, so first, he's got to deal with that. Hans offers yours and his help in dealing with the situation, to which von Berghoff eagerly agrees. He tasks you both with riding to Nabokov to meet with Jaromir Nebak and negotiate for him to send more troops to help fill the garrison for dealing with the bandits.
Dentes Fortuna
You meet with Hans down by the stable, and after a brief discussion, you set off for Nabokov. Once you arrive, the guard initially refuses to let you inside, but eventually relents. After entering, Hans meets with Nebek while you go with one of Nebek's men to get comfortable while you wait. As you explore around, you begin to notice some weird things. You recognize two of the men as the bandits who were searching for you at Bojena's hut. One of the villagers claims that he hasn't seen Sir Nebek in ages, and that all the guards here claim to be mercenaries. And if you steal the dungeon keys and sneak inside, you find the real Jaromir in one of the cells, who informs you that the bandits have actually seized the fortress and are holding him captive. After Hans's meeting is over, you immediately inform him of what you found out, and the both of you race back to Trotsky. Once you're back, you both head to von Berghoff and tell him what you just learned. He decides to muster a force to attack the fortress, but in the meantime, he tasks you and Hans with interrogating a captive bandit. You and Hans are hesitant to do so, but eventually you make your way down to the dungeon where the bandit's being kept. After an extremely disturbing sequence, you're able to find out that their leader is someone named Jan, that Istvan Toth is working with the bandits, and that Olda Samin's been helping the bandits, which is why he left his wedding early. Afterwards, you and Hans discuss what you've learned, and you decide to keep quiet about Olda Samin's involvement because you're worried that the rest of the people at the Samin fortress will suffer too. You head back to von Berghoff and inform him of what you learned minus Olda's involvement. Hans tries to talk to von Berghoff about the response to their message, but the dude instead strong-arms you both into joining them for a feast later and then planning for the attack. With no other choice, you are forced to back down and to go along with what he says. You and Hans arrive at the feast, noticing Catherine is there as well. You speak with von Berghoff, and he promises to write a reply to your message as soon as the bandits are dealt with. He's really putting this off, isn't he? He then goes over the plan of attack on Nabokov. The Chamberlain will be leading the attack first thing tomorrow morning, and you'll be passing through the Trotsky Gorge. Hans remarks that a frontal assault would be risky, but von Berghoff dismisses his concerns. You're then tasked with finding Catherine, later for wine, and the blacksmith for armor for Hans. You get the armor, and when you head to the kitchen to get the wine, you find out that Catherine's up and disappeared, but you get the wine from the cook. The next morning, you hand Hans his things, and you both set off to Nabokov with the Chamberlain and the soldiers.
You two are pathetic. I get the impression you're afraid to go into these woods. Weigh your words carefully, young man. You didn't fare any better yourselves.
Yeah, that's exactly why I'll be a lot more...
You're then ambushed by bandits armed with guns in the forest. Through the disarray and chaos, you do your best to stick close to Hans as you make your way through the battlefield. You eventually find the Chamberlain trapped under a horse and try to help save him, but he's killed before you can. Hans runs ahead and gets hit by an enemy mace, and you charge in and kill the bandit. You rush to Hans' aid, but he's too injured to really run. Just then, a group of bandits runs up and all aim their crossbows at you. But before they fire, a voice calls out for them to hold. The armored man from the pond shows up and reveals himself to be the one who was impersonating Nebek. After you call him a coward, he decides to give you a fair duel and tells you that if you win, he'll let you live. After immediately bodying him and hurting his eye, he growls at you, asking if you think that you can trust an outlaw to keep his word. You then see a graphic scene of bodies swinging from a tree surrounded in more bodies. Okay then. It then cuts to Godwin's POV as he monologues and makes his way to Trotsky, eventually stopping at the tavern in Yellowhav. You then see Godwin sitting at a table chatting with the innkeeper about the state of the church. From here, you play as Godwin as he continues telling the innkeeper about how the bishop kicked him out of his parish. As you ask the innkeeper about Hans and Henry, you find out that they got locked up at Trotsky, and then that they departed with the big force heading for Nebekov and are presumed dead. You insist on seeing for yourself and finding the bodies. Making your way through the forest filled with corpses, eventually you're stopped by a mercenary and ask him to take you to his commander to help you find Hans and Henry. It turns out that his commander is fucking Eric! But Godwin doesn't know him, so you ask Eric for his help. And then you learn that the captain took some prisoners, but Eric doesn't know who they are. Just then, you're interrupted by a group of looters who threaten all of you to leave or else they'll kill you. Eric promises to take you to the prisoners if you help kill the looters, to which you agree. After you kill them, you both head off to see the captain. Once you reach Nebekov, the captain shows up and Eric explains who you are and that you're looking for Hans and Henry. Captain then tells Eric that he just had an interesting conversation with Istvan and Hans and menacingly tells Eric that he thinks you want to have a chat with him too and to wait for him in the tower. The captain then goes to talk with you, and after a long argument, he turns you away. At that moment, one of the men calls out that there's a rebellion and they're attacking, and you use that moment to grab the captain at knife point. It's then revealed that the captain has you at knife point too.
Looks like you know how to use a blade.
Fighting Turks will teach you that.
Hungary?
Kosovo.
And after an absolute bro moment, the captain tells you that if you help him with the rebellion, he'll let Hans and Henry go, and you agree. After defeating all the rebels, you may back up with the captain who tells you that your friends were right, and von Bergoff's spies infiltrated them. The scene then flips to the POV of Henry as him and Hans are tossed in a cell. Then Istvan Toth appears and Henry screams at him. During the argument, Henry calls Istvan Sigismund's bitch, and the captain asks Hans what Henry's talking about. After Hans backs up Henry's claim, the captain has Istvan thrown in the cell with Nebek. A guard then appears and informs the captain that he's wanted at the gate, also revealing his name is Zizka. As Henry and Istvan argue, Istvan reveals that he's been working for Otto von Berghoff as a spy to infiltrate Zizka's group. At that moment, Eric barges in and frees Istvan, telling him that they have to leave immediately, and they run away. A bit later, Godwin bursts in and frees Henry and Hans. With a big pile of misunderstanding, you and everyone decide to introduce yourselves and work out what just happened. The captain formally introduces himself as Jan of Trotznov, also known as Zizka, and that he works for Jan Sokol of Lamberg and Margrave Prokop of Luxembourg, King Wenceslas's allies, meaning that you're on the same side. Holy shit, this is a lot of names to remember. You then explain that von Berghoff tricked you and Hans into fighting Zizka's bandits because Zizka's group attacked you first and then von Berghoff, and that Istvan was with Zizka as well. Turns out that Zizka's mission is much the same as Toth's was in Sasau, to wage a guerrilla war against the local nobles so that they aren't able to provide as much aid to their respective side. Godwin then insists on seeing Zizka's injured eye, and we get another fun scene.
Don't worry. I'm sure it doesn't look half as bad as it feels. I'll have to clean that out. Just get it over with.
You begin helping around the fort to prepare to leave in the morning before von Berghoff attacks, and once you're finished, you head to bed. That night, you're once again plagued with nightmares about your parents and Markvart as the sound of a horn slices through your dreams and you're woken to the noise of scrambling men. It turns out that an army of the Prague militia has shown up first thing in the morning, led by Markvart. His forces had been in the area, allowing von Berghoff to have a force ready almost immediately to retake Nebekov. As Eric, Istvan, Markvart, Nebek, and Otto von Berghoff parley with you and order you to surrender, Hans retorts with quite an appropriate response.
Kiss our asses!
God, is this retribution for my sins?
You tell him, Hans. Otto then turns to ride away, but not before pausing to tell Nebek that his castle's going to need some repairs. Markvart then gives the order to attack, and you try your hardest to hold the castle, but eventually Zizka gives the order to retreat to the tower. Once there, Michael rants that you're done for, but Zizka is sure that the enemy will parley. Just then, the sound of a horn goes off, and as Godwin goes to look, the enemy pulls back a wall, and is that a fucking cannon? Godwin lets out a quick prayer before the enemy fires the cannon and the tower gets blasted. Henry comes to and tries to gather his surroundings, but a beam falls and knocks him back out cold. Holy shit, this guy's starting to pass out almost as much as Aiden from Dying Light 2. Anyway, Henry wakes up on a prison wagon with Godwin, Zizka, and Hans. Istvan rides up and begins mocking you all and explains that the cannon's called the Finger of God. The enemy convoy then comes to a halt, and Otto orders Ishvan to go back to Trotsky with you and the other prisoners to torture you and figure out everything you know. In the meantime, Otto plans to head back with Markvart and see the king, also taking Hans with him, but before leaving, hands some orders to Ishvan with the location of where he'll be. It then cuts to you, Zizka, and Godwin being tortured by Ishvan and the executioner. He wants to know where Margrave Jobst and John of Liechtenstein are, and initially focuses his efforts on getting Zizka to answer, but when he realizes he's not getting anywhere, he decides to shift his focus onto you. He tries his best to coax the answer out of you, but you're able to hold out to the point where he gives up, so he orders the executioner to finish you off, to which Godwin exclaims, "No!" and spills that Jobst is looking for allies to take on Sigismund and is currently in Brandenburg, and also that Liechtenstein is in Kuttenberg. Ishvan decides to spare you since Godwin cooperated, and he informs you that you'll be interrogated more tomorrow, and leaves you for the night. You then hear some singing in the distance and the sound of the guard being knocked out before the door swings open, and yo, it's Catherine! It turns out that she's been working as a spy for Zizka this entire time. She frees you and informs you all of a secret passage, but you'll need a key from the lord of the castle, which is Ishvan at the moment. You decide to go after Ishvan and the key, while Godwin and Zizka go for the orders von Berghoff had given. You come out into the courtyard and are able to witness Ishvan see Eric off as he goes to Kuttenberg to find Liechtenstein.
What's the matter? You worried about me?
Don't worry, I'll be fine.
You've grown into a very capable young man.
After whatever kind of tension this was, Istvan heads up to the tower and you begin following it. Eventually you make your way to the top where you find Ishvan and you start to talk to him. He insists that you're a lot like him and Eric, and tries to give you advice to look out for yourself at the end of the day because you and them are just pawns to the nobleman. He also warns you against revenge, saying that although it's necessary sometimes, it doesn't give life meaning. You decide to duel him instead of butchering him, and after you defeat him, you pierce him with your sword. In his last moments, he grabs onto you and gurgles out that you'll see he was right in the end, and you decide to enroll him in an experiment with gravity. With phase 1 of your revenge complete, Radzig's sword in your hand, and the key to the passage obtained, you head back to meet up with the rest of your group at the entrance to the secret passage. You make your way through the passage before reaching the entrance and notice that there's a group of guards already searching for you. Catherine has people to help sneak you away, but they're half a mile away, and Zizka's too injured to make the journey. You decide to take a moment to read the orders you stole, and turns out that Sigismund's mustering his allies and their forces at Kuttenberg, where John of Liechtenstein also is. You head out to find Catherine's people and eventually find one of them who informs you that they left the wagon and horses a bit further away, so you go to find them. Once you do, you tell them that the situation got complicated and they come back and help Zizka get onto the wagon before seeing the 4 of you off. After a bit, Godwin informs you that he's planning to head back to Hanush and Radzig and informs them of just everything. As you're riding along, you eventually doze off and dream of Martin at his forge before he shifts into Istvan.
How does it feel? You and I still have a lot of work to do.
You wake up to having fallen off your horse, and Catherine helps you up, and you continue on your way, eventually making it to Suckdal in the Kuttenberg region.
This is why the peasants need putting in line. This is what happens when you don't keep the peasants in line.
As you ride towards Suckdal Castle, Zizka and Catherine make mention of someone known as the Dry Devil, but his actual name is Lord Hinnick of Kunstadt, and he's at Suckdal Castle. Zizka informs you that the plan is to see Sir Peter of Pisek, the mintmaster to King Wenceslas. Eventually you make it to Suckdal Castle and enter into the courtyard where you're met by Sir Peter. Zizka informs him that he brings a message for Hinnick and Peter, but just then a voice calls out. Turns out that it's Margrave Jobst who informs you that Hinnick's not here right now. He orders you all to rest, that you can talk tomorrow, and then he rides off. Okay. After informing Peter of what you've been up to recently, he informs you that Hinnick isn't here right now because him and Jobst got into a huge disagreement. You then finish eating and lay down to get some rest, during which you have another nightmare. In it, you stand over the dead body of Istvan before Martin comes up behind you and asks you about your revenge and your future plans before disappearing. You're then woken up by the castle maid, who informs you that Margrave's asking for you and Zizka, so you go down to meet him. After entering the dining hall, you update Jobst on everything that's happened, and he offers for you to head back to Rete, but you refuse and express your desire to save Hans. Jobst tells you that Hans will be fine and that you should just wait for a ransom demand. At that moment, Žižka arrives. He confronts Jobst about the fact that Jobst refused to grant Hynek asylum because Jobst had negotiated a truce with Sigismund to give them time to prepare, and warns Žižka that if he interferes with his truce, there will be consequences, and with that, Jobst leaves. You and Žižka meet Catherine in the courtyard, and he informs her that you're going with them and they'll help you find Capon. He then tasks Catherine with going to Kuttenberg to find out what happened to Liechtenstein, while you and him go to track down Hynek, the Dry Devil, and his band. You head out with Žižka and decide to start your search at a local bar favored by bandits, poachers, and other criminals called the Devil's Den. Once you arrive, you notice a group of men getting ready to kill a drunk man, but Žižka interrupts and threatens the group.
Either you pay us back our coin, or you can leave your head with us.
You wouldn't get a groschen for an alternative, mine.
You're right about that.
I'd have a use for that turnip.
But I can only pay for it with iron.
Žižka? You turn on your heel and get going. If you value your life. You might have noticed there's more of us than you.
That can be fixed.
After dispatching the group of men, Žižka introduces the drunk man as Kubianka, a member of the Dry Devil's band. Kubianka informs you both that the devil was captured and the rest of the band scattered. Apparently they botched a job in Kuttenberg and that's where the devil got captured, but they're planning to transport him soon, so you suggest ambushing the wagon as they pass through. Žižka agrees, and Kubianka mentions possibly knowing where some hand cannons are located. So Žižka decides that he's going to go hire some men while you and Kubianka go to find the hand cannons. After going around on a wild goose chase, digging up a bunch of random stuff, eventually you find the guns, and you and Kubianka head back to meet up with Žižka at the ambush site. Once you arrive, Žižka gives you the plan of attack, and it begins.
How many fucking times have I told you? Are you deaf?
Pay no attention to him, Rupert.
Pay no attention to him, Rupert.
But you hold me up in irons. You can't even show me a grain of human decency. Pull!
What the fuck?
Damn. There's more of them than I was expecting.
I can't back out now. Let's blast at them and seize the advantage.
Oi! You two! Get that wreck off the road. Not to worry, Honourable Sir. We're working on it. To the task!
Matilda! Fucking hell! My leg, damn it! You idiot!
After killing the guards and grabbing the Dry Devil, you hightail it back to the Devil's Den. Once back, Žižka starts asking the devil about whether he has a hideout and where his people are. The devil tells him that their old camp sucks and that they're going to be staying around at the Devil's Den, and also that his men all bailed except Kubianka. You're able to ask around and get hints about the whereabouts of the men, and are eventually able to convince a couple of them to come back, Adder and Yanish. Once you report back to the Dry Devil, you all gather to drink together to celebrate the reunion of the Devil's Pack, and you also tell them what happened to the other members. The next morning, you meet up with the Dry Devil and he tells you that you should go see Catherine in Kuttenberg and see how the search for Liechtenstein is going. You make your way to Kuttenberg and find Catherine working in one of the taverns, and you ask her what she's learned about Liechtenstein. She tells you that she had heard some regular at a seedy tavern known as the Hole in the Wall suddenly started buying drinks for the whole tavern and apparently told people that he was spying for some rich lord. She informs you that his name is Goatskin, so you head off to go find him and question him. Once you get to the tavern, none of the people will tell you about Goatskin and insist you speak to Chenyek about it. Initially, he refuses to tell you anything, but after some convincing, he informs you that no one's seen Goatskin for a few days. He recommends that to find Goatskin, you should look for him around the horse market because he robs drunks around there. After catching Goatskin, you begin questioning him about the rich noble he works for. He mentions someone named Samuel and that you can find him at King Solomon, a Jewish tavern. Once you arrive and find Samuel, you ask him about John of Liechtenstein and where to find him. He offers to help you if you help him spy on a group of anti-Semitists. So you agree, and he tells you where to find them. Once you arrive to the spot, a man locks the gate behind you, trapping you, and you're attacked by two guys. As you're about to kill them, you're interrupted by Samuel. He thinks that you're on the enemy's side and tries to make a deal with you, but you correct him that you're on John's side. He initially refuses to take you, but you offer to go unarmed if he lets you, so he takes your sword cautiously and examines it. After noticing Martin's maker's mark on the sword, he hands the sword back to you and tells you that he'll trust you if you trust him, and then holds up a cloth for you to blindfold yourself. Eventually, you're led into a room, and Samuel unmasks you. John recognizes you immediately from when he met you with Jobst in Rattay. Damn, he had one hell of a glow up from the first game. You proceed to update John and Samuel on all the events since you arrived at Trotsky. One thing I love about the sequel is even the characters poke fun at the fact that the plot gets really complicated.
I am starting to get confused. That makes two of us. Maybe we'll understand better if we get drunk.
You know, in retrospect, I feel like the reason there's dedicated sections in the game just to update other characters on what's happened so far is to actually remind the player what's happened as well, considering the fact that it can take like 107 hours to complete everything in the game. After you finish catching John up, you explain to him that you need help finding Capon and also that his location got revealed while you were getting tortured. He's not concerned at the fact that the enemy knows he's in Kuttenberg because it's such a large city, and he informs you that Otto got Malashov Fortress after Sigismund took it from the Rutards and has been staying there recently, so it's most likely that Hans is being held hostage there as well. John tells you that they need a plan and suggests going to Sir Rutard, since he's probably not happy at the fact that Malashov got taken from him and that he might help you. You arrive at the Rutard's palace in the city just in time to witness a nobleman with a group of guards threatening Sir Rutard to sell the Rutard mining rights to the nobleman. Sir Rutard refuses and goes a step further by threatening to reveal the fact that the nobleman's stealing the royal silver. The nobleman gets infuriated and orders his guards to seize Sir Rutard, but at that moment a red-headed noble lady storms out with a crossbow. She aims it at the nobleman's guards and tells them not to move. The nobleman signals one of his guards to aim an arrow at her, and she shoots the guard before he can. The nobleman uses it as a provocation to attack Sir Rutard, and it's revealed that the mysterious nobleman is the royal mintmaster for King Sigismund. As the brawl begins, Henry joins in and helps defeat all the royal mintmaster's men. Afterwards, Sir Rutard argues with the noble woman who's introduced as his daughter, Lady Rusa Rutard. Rutard and his daughter apologize for the mess and reveal the royal mintmaster's name to be Ulrich Vavak. You tell Rutard about how you need help getting into Malashov, and he tells you he can't because of Vavak causing trouble for him and trying to take his mining rights. You propose doing something about Vavak, and Rutard tells you about rumors that Vavak is stealing silver and even producing counterfeits, and he wants you to find proof so that Rutard can blackmail Vavak into leaving him alone. He mentions that the silver goes missing somewhere along the way to the mint and suggests you investigate. He tells you that you can get help from Peter of Pizek's brother, Christian, because Christian wanted to be mintmaster, but Vavak took the role, so he was stuck working in the steward's office. Rutard tells you that Christian can be found in Horschen by the mines, and to tell Christian the password Via Argentum, which means the path of silver. Once you meet with Christian and tell him the password, he informs you that he doesn't have any news for Rutard because he's too busy to investigate. You offer to help him investigate, and he gladly accepts your help and gives you a rundown as to how to determine where the silver is being lost. He suggests starting by asking miners from every shift to see how much silver they mined on a single date, and then compare it with the numbers from the mine record books and see if there's any discrepancies. After asking the 3 mining shift leads the amount they mined on the same day, you report back to Christian, who informs you that the mined record states that less was mined, meaning that Foreman, Fett, and Herman, the ore merchant, are both in on it. He suggests confronting them both and getting them to cooperate with the investigation, and then to report back to him. You learn from Herman that he's pretty sure the smelting works are in on it too, and you learn from Fett that he gets the money from the unreported silver from the smelting works. With all the evidence pointing to the smelting works being involved too, you report back to Christian on what you've learned. He tells you that you need to talk to Burish, the owner of the smithing works, but that he's an extremely cautious man. You arrive at the smithing works, but Burish refuses to talk to you, so you begin sneaking around and asking the workers if they've seen anything. Eventually, one of the smelters, Shima, tells you to meet him outside in a bit, and when you do, he tells you that the head smelter, Volkmar, is the person behind the missing silver at the smithing works, so you go to confront him. When you do, he reveals that they've known you've been investigating for a while, and then 3 thugs appear. Once you defeat them, you confront Volkmar, who informs you that Burish is the one in charge and that Burish forced him to cooperate. You also learn that Burish has a secret mint in one of the mined-out shafts near Old Kutna, and he hands you a map, so you go to investigate. Once you make it into the shaft and start searching around, eventually you make your way to a cavern where Burish and a small band of armed men are waiting for you. Burish initially tries to bribe you, and when you decline, he orders his men to attack. Of course, being the main character, you kill them all and confront Burish, who finally spills that the whole operation was Vavik's idea. And you tell Burish to give proof, so he hands you a letter to him from Vavik, and also tells you that there's more proof in the chest. Also, what the fuck is wrong with Henry here? Why does he look more cursed than my Unreal Engine 5 version? Henry, it's gonna be okay. After grabbing all the documents, you return to Christian and show him everything you learned. He then proposes that instead of shutting the entire operation down, you just take it over instead, and you're free to blackmail Vavik all you want. Knowing that technically Christian would be stealing silver from Sigismund, you agree and head back to the Rutards to report what you learned. When you arrive back at the Rutards' palace and enter the dining hall, you witness Sir Rutard speaking with another nobleman by the name of Martin. As they discuss whether certain nobles will switch to siding with Wenceslas and eventually bring up Vavik, you chime in and inform them that you have proof of his crimes against the crown. Just then, Rutard's guard captain rushes in and informs you all that Vavik's on his way with an armed cohort, and you meet him in the courtyard. Vavik tries to persuade Rutard into selling his mining rights, but Rutard then turns the table and has you reveal the proof to Vavik's theft. Vavik then backs down and begins negotiating with Rutard and Martin, who then tell him to spy on Sigismund, and after a friendly reminder that they could get him executed any time, he agrees. With everything settled, you ask Rutard to hold up his end of the bargain and help you into the Malshov. He informs you of a secret passage out of Malshov and tells you to ask Rosa for details because it turns out that she was the one who found it. Rosa gives you the detailed instructions on how to find the hidden entrance in the forest, and that the passage leads to the castle cellars. Once you manage to make your way inside, you witness a discussion between Otto, Markvard, and Eric. As they discuss politics and also the fact that they're planning up a way to raid the Jewish quarter to find John, a messenger comes riding in and informs them that Sigismund's gathering the city's council and that Ishtvan's been killed.
Who? Speak! I swear, by everything that is holy, I will find that whoreson, and I will rip out his heart!
So, Eric's not taking it well, and with that, you continue your search for Capon. After stealthily taking out all the guards and eventually making your way to the top of the castle, you find a locked room and investigate. Inside, you discover a French nobleman, and when you go to hold him at sword point to keep him quiet, Hans calls out to you and reveals himself.
Hello, are we going to talk about what happened? He's looking right at me. He's looking right at me. He's looking right at me. God, he's fucking handsome.
He introduces the French nobleman as Vauquelin and Brabant, and he's also Sigismund's prisoner because Brabant led the Kuttenberg defense against him. As you inform them of the escape plan, Hans strongly objects to leaving back through the passageway. Poor little guy has claustrophobia.
Oh yeah, unfortunate circumstances that you got us into, you fucking
And you eventually have to change the plan to steal the stable horses and leave through the front gate. You're able to pull off the new plan without a hitch, and the three of you ride into the countryside. Eventually, you hear a group of horsemen coming towards you, and tension is high before it's revealed to be Radzig, Hanish, and Godwin with a host of soldiers. As they ride up to you, you start catching up with your father on everything that's happened. He informs you that they're heading to a gathering of Wenceslas' supporters in Raborsh, which Godwin grumbles his displeasure at having to go there of all places. You tell Radzig about how Sigismund's convened the city council to make an important announcement, and he tasks you with infiltrating the city council meeting to figure out what he's planning while Hans goes back with the rest to Raborsh. Hanish suggests using Vavik to somehow worm your way into the meeting, and then they ride off to Raborsh and you head back to Kuttenberg. You arrive at Vavik's house and coerce him into helping you get in. He informs you that his cook's son will be serving there and that you could probably convince him to let you fill in for him. Once you find the cook's son and convince him to let you take his place, you report for duty to the head waiter and you're in. After a quirky little minigame of filling the nobles' goblets with wine and a couple mini fetch quests, Sigismund finally appears alongside Markvard. It then cuts to Raborsh Fortress, where you take control of Godwin and witness the gathering of prominent supporters of Wenceslas. You find out from a conversation with Hans that Godwin's father is actually Martin, that you met before as Henry, and that Godwin and his father aren't on the best of terms. You begin mingling with the other guests, and when you speak with Samuel and the rabbi, you actually learn that Samuel is Martin's son by blood, making him Henry's almost brother. Okay. Eventually, Jobst begins a speech where he explains his plan to wait Sigismund out until winter, and then he'll probably leave of his own accord, to which Rutard and Zizka express their objections to his plan, and it devolves into a chaos of arguments. Afterwards, you and John get to talking, and he comes up with a plan to gain the support of a few key members to amass an army, but just to pressure Sigismund to leave on his own, satisfying both the members wanting to remain peaceful and also those who want to make sure they're properly defended in case Sigismund decides to attack. He asks you to find a way to convince 3 people to help: Božek, Haman, and Anna, while John focuses on convincing Jobst. After convincing all 3 and getting Hans engaged to Božek's niece,
What the fuck? That's such a weird logic.
you return to John, who's speaking with Jobst. After you explain that you've negotiated the support of the nobles you were tasked with, Jobst begins a second speech and explains his new updated plans. Multiple members then begin stepping forward and pledge their support to the new plan, during which it's officially announced about Hans marrying Božek's niece and... I genuinely feel sorry for Hans here, because could you imagine just recently dealing with both the events of the first and second game, being held hostage, just finally freed from being a hostage, and then being informed right after that you're now engaged to someone you've never met?
I am so unhappy.
Aside from Bohemia's most eligible bachelor now being promised, Jobst announces that he, Hanish, and Radzig are to set off immediately and return in a few weeks with an army. It then cuts back to the perspective of Henry at the council meeting, where you see Sigismund give orders to incite a raid led by Eric on the Jewish quarter to flush out John and the other rebels and establish Markvart as the authority over the city council. Sigismund then dismisses the council, but has you stay behind to serve him and Markvart. Listening to their conversation while serving them, you learn that Otto and his men have set off to attack Raborsch, where Godwin and Wenceslas's allies are right now. Not good. It then cuts back to Godwin as the party is in full swing and everyone's quite drunk. After stumbling around and mingling with the other guests some more, you go to see John, who tasks you with finding your father's stash of better alcohol. Once you find a pitcher in the cellar, you begin taking it back, and it cuts to Rutard, Zizka, Martin, and a couple of the other nobles chatting away before a guard yells down from the wall that there's some horsemen outside the fortress. Martin assumes that it's Peter, and one of the guards goes to open the gate for them, but it ends up being Otto and his troops. He gives the order, and his men storm into the fortress. One of the guards sounds the alarm, but the intruders and some of the guests draw their swords to defend the fortress. Otto's men yell out to seize the nobles and kill the rest before tossing a torch onto one of the roofs, causing it to catch fire. Godwin comes out just in time to see some of Otto's men capture Martin and Rutard, and then he charges into the fray. It then cuts to Henry, who came galloping straight there after the city council meeting. You take control of him and begin fighting your way through Otto's men outside and meet your allies in the middle. With the enemy repelled, you update each other on what's happened. After informing them of Sigismund's plan to ransack the Jewish quarter, Godwin suggests speaking with Samuel and John about it. You tell John first, and he immediately says he'll go, and tells you to tell Samuel and the rabbi to get ready to travel immediately, while John tries to get someone else to come too. When you speak with Sam and the rabbi, Sam reveals that he's Martin's bastard son. Afterwards, you tell him about the Jewish quarter raid, and the 3 of you meet up with John and Kubianka at the gate. Kubianka agrees to tag along, and the 5 of you set off. Once you reach the outskirts of Kuttenberg, Sam shows you the location of the hidden entrance to the tunnels running under all of Kuttenberg, and explains that it can lead all of them right to the Jewish quarter without having to enter the city through the gates. You make your way through the tunnels, and at one point, Sam tells you and John to keep going, and that you'll reach the tavern where you met Sam for the first time. Sam, the rabbi, and Kubianka are going to warn people and grab Torah. Once you get to the tavern, John realizes that Eric's men had already gotten there, and you go to clear the tavern while John gathers the rest of the documents. Once you're finished, you head to the courtyard and find Sam, who tells you that a few of the enemy got over the walls and that they've been dealt with, but there's more outside the gate. You and Sam then go to get Sam's mother and escort her to safety, and while you're escorting her, the enemy breaches the gate and begins to slaughter everyone. You and Sam rush to go help Kubianka and the other defenders while Sam's mom takes cover. As the 3 of you hold the line against the enemy, eventually John calls out for you to retreat back into the tunnels because everyone else is now safe. Once you exit the tunnels outside Kuttenberg, you talk to Sam's mom, Sarah, about Martin. You learn the reason that Martin left Kuttenberg is because Sarah's father, the rabbi, hid her far away for 4 years because he didn't like that an outsider was romantically involved with his daughter, and Martin didn't know that she was pregnant. You then tell Sam your plans to head back to the Devil's Den to figure out what the plan is now, and Sam tells you that he'll come along too once he helps to safely escort the refugees to the town of Kutten.
What? Don't raise your eye. Always giving me a right look there, isn't he?
Once you get to the Devil's Den, you inform Zizka that Sam wants to be there for the meeting too, so he decides to postpone the meeting until tomorrow when he guesses Sam will be back. And once it's time, you start the meeting. You, Kubianka, and Samuel then update the rest on what happened, and afterwards Hans suggests capturing Otto while you all wait for Jobst to return with an army. You all conclude that you need the cannon that Otto used at Nebakov since he's holed up at Malashov right now. Zizka then explains to the group that he recently sent Catherine to spy in Sigismund's camp, and she recently informed him that Otto has his cannon stashed there, but soon plans to move it somewhere else, which means that they can be ambushed on the way. Sam also donates some coins so Zizka can hire mercenaries for the raid, to which Brabant speaks up and mentions that he knows some mercenaries that would be willing. Zizka then volunteers you to get yourself recruited by the Prague regiment in Sigismund's camp, and then when they plan to move the cannon, you tell Catherine, who will in turn tell Zizka. Once you arrive at the camp, you find Catherine, who's working at the baths, and she helps bathe you while you explain the plan to her, since no one will be suspicious if they see you. She informs you that the cannon was supposed to move out already, but that they got held up for some reason, and also that the camp is under 3 commanders. Churton, who commands the Cumans, Grozov, who runs the camp, and Katz, who's the leader of the Praggers. She mentions the best way to be able to join the Praggers would be to speak with Crow, Katz's right-hand man. Once you find him and eventually convince him to let you join, he takes you to see Katz. Apparently the reason they haven't moved the cannon yet is because a group of their soldiers went missing while transporting a wagon of important cargo. So Katz assigns you to track down the cargo, and if you succeed, then he'll let you join them. Before you leave, Katz tells you that one of the members from the group came back wounded and has been asleep ever since, and suggests seeing the doctor to figure out if you can learn anything from him. Once you arrive at the infirmary, you meet Musa of Mali, who's the lead physician. He explains that the injured man will take weeks to come to his senses, but after some pushing, he suggests making a cockerel potion, which would wake the injured man up for a little bit. Once you administer it to the injured man, he explains that the other soldiers decided to steal the shipment and hide in Lhoda, and when he spoke out against it, they attacked him, and he just barely got away. Having learned everything, you set off for Lhoda, and once you get there, you kill the deserters and take back the documents. You report back to Katz, who's speaking with Musa, and he officially declares you one of them. You ask him if it's time to leave with the cannon, but first, Katz wants to celebrate, so you, Musa, and him get drunk and have a good time until you're interrupted by Crow rushing in. He insists the 3 of you come with him, and you find Churton severely injured. Musa rushes him to the infirmary, and you notice the shed with the cannon's been messed with. Once you inform Katz of what you discovered, you both head back to the infirmary where Grozov informs you that Churton died and accuses Musa of killing him. Musa explains that he gave Churton wine to prepare him for surgery, but then he started vomiting blood and died, so you speculate that the wine was poisoned. You and Katz speak up to defend Musa, but Grozov orders that Musa be kept in his tent under guard until the royal justiciar, royal judge, can arrive. With time counting down, Katz tasks you with investigating to prove Musa's innocence. After some research, you discover that Churton was poisoned using Kiss of Death. And when you report back to Musa with what you learned, he questions who you actually are. And when you reveal that you're against Sigismund, he expresses his dislike for Sigismund as well and promises not to reveal your secret. You then begin searching all the suspects' tents for the materials required to brew the Kiss of Death, and you eventually find them all in Crow's tent? With all the evidence gathered, you wait for Musa's trial to begin, and when it does, you reveal all the facts and accuse Crow. Once you prove the case, the royal justiciar orders that Crow be arrested, but instead of going quietly, he tries to kill you. Once he's dead and Musa's cleared, Katz informs you to be ready to set off with the cannon soon. You then quickly rush to inform Catherine that the cannon's moving soon, and then report back to Katz. Before you set off, Katz promotes you to corporal, and you set off with the cannon. That was a really quick promotion. Eventually, the raid begins, and you help Zizka kill the rest of the guards. Once they're all dead, you report to Zizka, and you head back to the Devil's Den with the cannon in tow. Once you get back to the Devil's Den and speak with Zizka, he informs you that Otto is at Malashov right now, and that you should go see him when you're ready. Everyone then gathers to plan the attack, and Zizka hands out assignments. You go with Dry Devil's group, and once you arrive at Malashov, Dry Devil reveals that they're going to torch the village and slaughter everyone. You stand up to him and refuse because that's like what happened in Skalitz, and he duels you. After you defeat him, he agrees to do things differently, and you meet up and inform Zizka. Why the hell is everyone pissed off at you at the fact that you won't slaughter an entire village? First Dry Devil and now Zizka. I swear it's harder to finish the first game as a virgin, and it's harder to finish the second game as not a war criminal because, dear God, the peer pressure is immense. Anyway, so you, Hans, Janusz, Adder, and Sam stealthily scale up Malashov's wall with a ladder, and while the others take control of the drawbridge, you open the first gate for Zizka and the others. Once the gates open and the rest of the men charge into battle, you begin clearing the outer bailey. The rest of your group fail to take control of the drawbridge, so once you clear the outer bailey, you're forced to take cover and hold out, but eventually the cannon team fires a shot that takes out the drawbridge, and you're able to advance. Once you've defeated all the troops in the courtyard, that just leaves Otto, who's holed up in the tower. You decide to parley with him, and he reveals that he has Lady Rosa held captive. With no other choice, you convince Otto to let you take him captive. San then tries to kill Otto in revenge for what he did at the Jewish quarter, but Zizka stops him. With everything finished up, everyone then packs up and leaves. Once you make it to Sokdol, you meet up with Zizka and he tells you to get some rest and that they'll interrogate Otto tomorrow. When you lay down for the night, you get another nightmare where Istvan mocks you about the events of Malashov. The next morning, you go to see Zizka and begin questioning Otto. Otto reveals his willingness to make a deal and also that Sigismund is having trouble here and in Hungary. Troops aren't getting paid, so morale is low, and since the Kuttenberg miners are rebelling, he's running out of silver. Otto suggests stealing the royal treasury at the Italian court because it would force Sigismund to withdraw back to Hungary even sooner, and on top of that, the nobles captured at Reborsch are being held there, so it would allow you to rescue them as well. Peter exclaims that it's impossible because the Italian court is like a fortress, but Rosa interjects and explains that she knows of a secret passage from the Rutard Palace to St. James's Church, which is right beside the Italian court. Plus, there's a tunnel that runs right under the Italian court. Peter mentions that all the noise would just cause the guards to find them and stop them immediately, so Jan muses that you'll need someone on the inside to distract the guards and lead everyone else to the silver. You suggest that Vavik help, and Peter explains that he also has the Mint Master's key, which you'll need to get to the silver anyway, and that Vavik can't be trusted, but that he's your only hope. Otto then interjects and suggests using a special guest instead, and Peter immediately realizes who he means and explains that a papal legate is coming from Rome to settle a dispute about the new church, and that he's going to be received at the Italian court. Otto explains that no one knows them, has seen them, and very few understand their language, so it'd be very easy to take their place. Dry Devil resolves to capture them and just hold them captive until you finish the silver and then just let them go. Peter informs the group that the legate is currently staying in Loretz with his escort, and Godwin interjects, trying to convince the group to let him try and reason with the legate before resorting to violence. Zizka and Otto agree that it would be a better idea because none of their allies could really pass off as an Italian cardinal, and so it'd be easier if you made him take you as his retinue. Zizka tasks you with going to Vavik and to try and get anything helpful you can out of him, as well as getting the Mint Master's key, and afterwards to meet them at Rutard Palace, where they'd arrive the next morning. Rosa interjects and suggests that you and her go through a secret passage to the Rutard Palace first and ensure the coast is clear before you head to Vavik's home, and Zizka agrees. Before you and Rosa head out, she tells you that when Otto's men captured Rutard, they also ransacked Rutard Palace before taking her to Malashov. You and her then set off, and after making your way through the hidden tunnel, you arrive at Rutard Palace to the sounds of grumbling and things being tossed around. Once you make it out of the cellar, you see that the palace is currently being ransacked by lowlifes, and Rosa tasks you with killing them while she climbs the ivy up to her room window. Once they're all dead, you head up to meet and reassure her at the fact that her home's been ransacked. She explains that once her father's rescued, they'll both have to leave far away, and you tell her that you'll do everything in your power so she can stay. Afterwards, you go to get some rest, then you see Zizka, and eventually head out to see Vavik. When you arrive at his house, you find two men standing guard, so you have to sneak around and enter through the back. Once you make your way up to his office, you find Christian there instead. He explains that Vavik took the money from the secret mint and skipped town a few days ago. You then explain your plan to him, and he informs you that Giuseppe, the captain of the guard, is actually from Italy and has expressed his excitement to see other Italians. After convincing Christian to help you out, you ask him where the key is, but he says the only thing Vavik left was a letter, which he hands to you. After reading the letter and finding the key in the outhouse, you head back to Zizka. You update the group on what happened and also the fact that the commander of the Italian court is a native Italian, so the group going with the cardinal will have to know some Italian. Brabant reveals that he knows Italian, but Dry Devil reminds him that his face is well known in Kuttenberg, so he's gonna need to hang back. Zizka then comes up with a plan and informs the group they are to confront the cardinal in Loretz while most of the townsfolk are still asleep, and then to convince him to help you while some of your allies escort his retinue to the Devil's Den. Once you arrive at Loretz, Godwin tries his best to speak Latin.
Nos non... Oh, fuck. Nos non quer vos nos vos non vulnerabo. Nobis est petitio. No. Proposal. Ragazio. Ita. Ragazio. Can you cut it short? Fuck! Don't interrupt! Latin is tough when you're sober.
Ha! Fucking hell! Andiamo! Forza! After them! They mustn't get away!
One of the guards stabs Kubienka and helps the cardinal get away. You get on your horse and ride after them, and then...
Who's keeping these these roads. No one looks after him, you know.
My words exactly. I mean, no one gives a damn until some noble rides along. And then he's surprised.
Per amor di Dio, mi lascia in pace. Io sono un uomo di chiesa, capite? Non ho fatto nulla. Misericordiosa Vergine Maria. Cosa pide Vergine Maria?
Curvato un gambe!
Aiuto!
Right, let's see him.
Nic mu nie jest, jest lekko otumaniony. No przecież lekko dostał z bańki, no leciutko.
You've killed him.
Boże, czemu dałeś mi tak tępy łeb?
With the plan in ruins, Zizka decides that Godwin should take the place of the Legat. Once you head back to Rutard Palace and speak with Zizka, he tells you that preparations are finished and that it's time to get started. He explains that obviously Godwin will pose as the cardinal while Janusz will be his right-hand man, and you, Capon, Brabant, and Adder will be the rest of the retinue. Afterwards, while Godwin and Janusz are in the meeting, you and the others will take care of the guards and clear the path to the silver. He then sends you to Brabant to learn some Italian before it's time so that you can be somewhat passing. After learning some common phrases, you head over to Rosa and Catherine to pick up your retinue clothing. With everyone finally ready, you meet up with Godwin in the court, who informs you that he can only speak fluent Italian and Latin if he's drunk, and then your group sets off. It then cuts to you playing as Godwin, and can I just say, it's so weird to see your usual playable character as an NPC talking to you.
I feel quite hungry!
Anyway, you and your group begin walking down the street and greeting the people who've come to see you. Eventually make it to the Italian court and are greeted by one of the city officials, and after introducing yourself as the cardinal, he allows you inside. After a brief tour, you're eventually stopped by the guard commander, Giuseppe, who's the Italian native that Christian warned you about. After somehow being able to convince him that you're legitimate, the official escorts you and Janusz to the meeting, while Giuseppe escorts Henry and the others to the kitchen. Thus begins another minigame-esque section where, while trying to resolve the dispute, you have to keep Godwin a certain level of drunk so that he can continue to speak Latin fluently and not make the others suspicious of him. After hearing out both sides, you convene the meeting and tell the two sides to make amends and work on a solution together. They eventually agree and everyone celebrates, and you notice that Musa is here as well. With that settled, it then cuts back to Henry and the rest of the group as you enjoy dinner in the kitchen. Adder flirts with the cook, and then Hans goes over the plan. The objective is to clear out all the guards, and once they're dealt with, you'll meet up at the well. After you take out the guards on the walls and in the courtyard, you meet with Brabant and ask him why he didn't take care of the ones at the gate, and it turns out that he chickened out. Hans then shows up, and you and him decide to take out the guards together. Once they're dealt with, that's all the guards gone, and you meet up with the others at the well. When you arrive, you realize that Adder is missing, and so you go to find him. Eventually you find him in the kitchen, helping the cook that he was flirting with earlier. At that moment, Giuseppe comes in, and it turns out that the cook is his wife. And so we get this soap opera of a scene.
When you fucked Lousy Mary, you too told me you'd never do it again.
Sono passati 5 anni! Fatta la legge, trovato l'inganno.
Afterwards, you confront Adder, and he reveals that he found the tools before he decided to stir the pot. And so you get to work taking down the cellar wall to let Zizka and the rest inside the court.
Really as hell without pay.
La cour italienne is ours.
With everyone inside the court, you head to the council room to let Godwin and Janusz know that it's finished. And afterwards, Zizka has Catherine lock and guard the door, keeping all the council members trapped as prisoners. Back in the courtyard, you, Janusz, and Adder head up to go rescue the captured nobles, including Rosa's and Godwin's fathers, while the rest go to steal the silver. After convincing the guards to surrender, you're able to free the nobles. Then you have some heartwarming reunions, Rosa escorts the nobles back to Rutard Palace, and you decide to head to the wall and see Zizka. Once you find him, he has you take over Kubienka's post of lookout. And at that moment, Kubienka calls out that the Proggers have arrived from all sides, and it cuts to a scene showing the group being led by Eric. He calls out to Zizka and tells him to hand you over, and then he'll let the rest go.
Hand over, Radzig's bastard, and I'll let the rest of you leave.
There is no such person here!
Zizka obviously rejects his offer, and then you peek over the wall and shit-talk Eric about how you killed Ishva. Oh my god, wait, is Henry actually the villain here? Eric gives the order to attack, and you do your best to hold the wall and take down the ladders, but they're able to breach the gate, and you have to defend the outer bailey. It then cuts to Musa as he helps break the other members of the council out, and they all attempt to flee. He's then cut off in the middle of a confrontation between yours and Eric's group. You and Eric begin fighting, but he's able to get the upper hand and gets poised to finish you off before Dry Devil shoots the man next to him and then ushers everyone to retreat back to the tunnels. Musa takes the opportunity to knock Eric to the ground and help you escape with the rest. As you rush through the tunnels, Dry Devil ignites a barrel of gunpowder and falls after you right before it explodes, causing all of you to suffer severe hearing damage. With the way behind you sealed, you follow Zizka and the others back to the crypts, where they realize that someone betrayed you and informed Eric. Godwin points out that there's no time to think about it right now, and you continue to head back to Rutard Palace, where Brabant's men are loading the wagons with the stolen silver. It then cuts to Brabant as you see him ushering his men to load it faster, right before your group arrives. Adder is celebrating and rushes over to Brabant and one of the wagons and takes a groschen to flip in the air, and as he does, Brabant stabs him. You and the others notice, and Brabant reveals that he wished that Eric had done the dirty work for him. Then all the mercenaries get into attack positions and start to fire at you. It turns out that Brabant was the traitor who informed Eric of what you were up to because he wanted to steal the silver for himself. Zizka orders you to sneak around and flank the archers, and when you do, you get a nice The Shining reference.
Here's Henry!
With almost all the mercenaries dead and Brabant and the survivors fleeing, you then shift your attention to Adder as you realize that he's dying.
You still owe me 50 groschen. You know how many fucks that would buy? Huh? Huh?
Do not hold corpse. Better to take living.
We have to go.
Nie choć raz w życiu odmówię modlitwę w spokoju.
You race your way across the countryside with Eric's men hot on your trail. As they begin firing arrows at your group, one of them hits Kubienka's horse and he goes tumbling. Another arrow hits Musa soon after, and Zizka makes the call to try and take refuge in Sukdal. You're just barely able to make your way inside with the silver, and as you get settled, Peter expresses his outrage at Zizka for making Sukdal a target for Sigismund. Later, you, Sam, and Hans are staring out over the wall, watching Eric's men set up a camp on the hill outside as you talk about if there's any hope for you at all, and you pass out from exhaustion. The next morning, you're woken up by Zizka, who informs you that Sigismund's pulling out with his army back to Hungary. As Zizka gives you the details of Sigismund's withdrawal, he explains that Rosa, Lord of Rutard, and a couple of the other nobles are setting off soon to where Jobst is amassing the Bohemian army, and suggests you say goodbye to Rosa before they leave. You see Rosa off, and she gives you a kiss on the cheek before her and her father leave. Afterwards, Godwin tells you and Hans that it's time to get boozing. And as you get ready to celebrate, the gate guard calls out that there's a friendly rider approaching. As it turns out, it's Kubienka. He survived last night, and Eric sent him to tell you that Eric's waiting for you at Sigismund's old camp. He wants you to duel him, so you decide to agree and you head there. At the very top of the hill, you find Eric waiting for you. And he tells you that you're no better than him, murdering in the name of revenge. Then you begin dueling. Eventually, you're interrupted by the sound of horns and horsemen, and you see a large army of Proggers marching towards Sukdal with a handful of horsemen heading towards you and Eric, as Eric explains that Sigismund's parting gift to Markvard was the silver you stole, and that you're not going to get away with it. As you race back to Sukdal to warn them, Eric mocks you. You get back right in time as some horsemen come forward to parley. One of them raises their visor, revealing himself as Markvard, and informs you all that he's here at the request of Sigismund and Otto to take the silver back. Peter explains that Sigismund has no claim to the silver, and that Otto is his guest, before it's revealed that the other knight is none other than Otto himself. It turns out that he escaped while everyone was celebrating, and was just pretending to be cooperating with your group. As Markvart demands your surrender, he's suddenly struck with a bolt, and it's revealed that Dry Devil shot him while being completely drunk and hit him square in the chest. Otto and Markvart retreat back, and you begin preparing for the Progress to attack.
Oh, Dentes Fortuna, fucking you, that.
You rush to the wall and begin defending it against the Progress until they eventually give up the assault. With the first wave repelled, you report back to Zizka, who tells you both to rest while him and Peter plan the defense. The next morning, Godwin comes and tells you that Zizka sent for you. Zizka informs you that he's putting you in command of a small company of men. After gathering them all and giving a motivational speech, you order them to reinforce the night watch. Then you get some sleep before being woken up early by an extremely drunk Dry Devil to take over watch. As you check in with the guards posted around the walls, you notice one of them acting a little strangely, and realize that he's an intruder and some proggers have breached the wall. After fending them off, you report to Zizka and inform him that Dry Devil neglected his watch, and he then orders you and your men to get some rest. It then cuts to day 11 of the siege, as you see the proggers slowly dismantle your castle defenses and roll up barricades. As your group holds a meeting, Zizka suggests that you and a couple of other men distract the attackers at the walls while a group of riders, led by the Devil, race through the village and disrupt the proggers' construction of barricades and ladders. After the meeting, Zizka informs you that there's a prisoner from the last clash that Dry Devil is going to interrogate soon, and he has you tag along. So after meeting up with Dry Devil, you begin the interrogation. After finding out the layout of the enemy camp and the best places to strike, you ask about the commanders and learn that Brabant is helping with the command, since Markvart is wounded and Otto took off right after the negotiations. Once the interrogation is over, you begin the attack operation. It ends up being a huge success with no casualties among your men, and after getting the details from Dry Devil, you report back to Zizka. After updating him, he orders you to get some rest in the meantime until something else happens. It's now day 25 of the siege, and you and Hans are leaning against one of the walls, starving. Eventually you get up and go to find you and Hans something to eat from the kitchen, but when you arrive, Janusz informs you there's nothing left to eat. Overhearing your conversation, Dry Devil stops and suggests you kill the stray dog wandering around and bring him back the meat so he can cook it. Once you drag the dog behind the proverbial wood shed, you bring the meat back to Dry Devil, and he cooks it into a stew. He hands you 2 portions for you and Hans, which you bring back to him and refuse to tell him where it's from. Oh god.
I love how he's also my dog.
The scene cuts to the funeral for all the men who died in the defense so far, and you take control of Godwin as he makes a speech. Right afterwards, horns ring out, and the wall guards announce that an attack is coming. You get into defensive positions with your men and fend off the ladders, but the enemy infiltrated the tower and begins firing at you. You then rush to the tower while Hans covers for you, and you start to clear out the proggers. With the enemy fended off once again, you and Hans reminisce about Talmberg, but are interrupted by Zizka calling out to raise the drawbridge. It turns out that the enemy's taken out the outer bailey, meaning that you only have the castle and the tower left. In another meeting, Zizka tells everyone that you won't last much longer at all, and that you're going to need Yop's army to help. As everyone begins arguing on what's the best course of action, Catherine lets out an outburst about how she knew things would end up like this again before storming off. Eventually, it's decided that you and Sam will sneak into the enemy camp, steal a horse, and ride to Yopst to tell him to send his army. Before you leave the room, Zizka stops you and tells you about Catherine's past. Apparently, she used to be a wife and mother, but Sigismund's army attacked her village, killed her husband and baby, and did awful things to her. Zizka explains that he's telling you all this because she's never let any man get too close to her except you, and that she might like you, so he suggests that you could talk to her before you leave. At this point, you have 3 options. You can be lame and go straight to the battlements and wait like a good little boy following orders. You can go and see Hans and get the scene that sets the Steam discussion board on fire before the game even released. By the way, this is skippable. Or you can go see the MILF and sleep with her before it's time to begin the operation. Whichever you choose. Later, you're standing at the battlements as Godwin and Sam come and begin to leave as Godwin sees you both off.
The Lord be with you. The Lord be with you.
I'm a fucking Jew.
Sam heads down first, and you follow on after him. Once you reach the bottom, you look around, and Sam's disappeared. With no other option, you head to the enemy camp and begin looking around, where you overhear that they just caught a spy. After stealing a soldier's uniform and sneaking inside, you start to look around before finding Markvart inside the tavern in the middle of the town. He realizes that you're here to kill him, and he tells you that he'll be dead by morning anyway. He also tells you that your father fought like a lion, and that you've done him proud. You express shock at the fact that he remembers your father, but he goes further to state that he remembers every single person he's killed, and that it's not an everyday thing. He then asks you if you remember everyone that you've killed, and he tells you that he only did what he had to do, just like Zizka, the Dry Devil, Sigismund, Wenceslas, and even you. After you and him argue politics for a bit, he reveals that he has a wife and 2 daughters, and tells you that no matter what armor and livery someone wears, you'll only ever find a man, and you're the only one who sees Markvart as the devil.
Every day when we pray,
We say to God, Thy kingdom come.
He said the name of the game. He said the name of the game! Eventually, you decide to spare Markvart since he's gonna die anyway, but before you leave, he asks you to get him some more wine, to which you hand him the whole pitcher, and he tells you farewell. Afterwards, you eventually come across a barn where you hear Brabant interrogating Sam. After fighting him, you decide to spare him, and he promises to let you both leave alive, but as soon as he gets far enough away, he begins calling for the guards, and I'd just like to take this moment to mention something. During this section, you can either choose to leave Sam behind and just ride off to Jobst and he'll die, or you can rescue him and ride off together. Rescuing him is harder because if you decide to be good and spare Brabant, he'll just alert the entire camp and make it near impossible to escape with Sam. When my editor was playing through the game, she decided the best course of action would be to blast breakcore music and stealthily slaughter the entire camp. And when I asked her about it, she just told me, there's no one left alive, there's no one to get in my way, smiley face. Anyway, with Sam saved, you can carry him to the stables and you ride off to deliver the message to Jobst together. You then take control of Godwin, as you see Henry and Sam off, and Hans shows up and begins talking with you. After speculating about whether they'll succeed, you reveal that you have a secret stash of alcohol, and so the both of you get far too drunk.
Hey, progress!
Eventually you pass out, and the next morning, you're woken to a giant crash. You go downstairs to find a huge hole in the wall from an enemy trebuchet and a very pissed off Peter. You rush down to the courtyard and, oh hey, it's the opening scene of the game. We came full circle. Can I just say that this is actually a stroke of brilliance by the game developers? When you first play through this scene and are being introduced to a bunch of new or revamped mechanics and not exactly doing the best, playing through the entire game to this point and then having the opportunity to play through it again, this time far more experienced, it makes playing through it not boring or repetitive in the slightest because it almost seems meant as a gauge at how far you've come. After making your way to the point where the game jumped the intro, you see Godwin distract Hans for a moment, talking about this or that, and ripping the arrow out once he's relaxed. As you both say some badass lines, you leap into the fray together. The enemy eventually gains control of the portcullis and raises the gate, leading to Žižka giving the order to fall back to the tower. It then cuts to the last day of the siege, and you see the courtyard full of proggers as they try to bash the door to the tower down. You then see the perspective of the inside as the group of survivors huddle, and the situation seems completely hopeless as people sob. It then shows the enemy's camp as they begin packing up their supplies, and wait, Jobst's army has arrived.
Look at them! The Prague lords who bent their knees to Sigismund. And even after he fled our country, they carried on plundering our lands, invading, killing, raping, spilling the blood of their fellow countrymen for a foreign usurper. Should they get away with it? Traitors! The time has come to put a stop to them forever! To sweep them off our lands! Fight them! Hunt that rabble back to Prague in the name of King Wenceslas!
You see Henry and the rest of the army charge through the camp, sweeping through the proggers, but once Henry makes his way into the outer bailey, he's knocked from his horse. As you take control of Henry, you begin defeating all the attackers. After you've seized control of the outer bailey, you follow another soldier as you climb one of the siege ladders so you can raise the portcullis. Once you raise it, you head to the courtyard to help the others defeat the last of the proggers. Once you do, you reunite with Hans and the others, and you have a nice, lovely, heartwarming moment with them. Hanish arrives and begins talking with Hans and everyone else, and you find out that the proggers stole all the silver the day before. Hanish then has you sharpen his sword while he has a private word with Hans outside. After sharpening Hanish's sword and catching up with all your friends, you head over to Hanish and return it to him. He tells you that he's tasking you with making sure the wedding happens when the time comes. He then mentions that your father is somewhere in the fields outside of the village, and so you go to look for him. As you near the outskirts of the village, it shifts to a cutscene as you relax under a tree on a hill overlooking the whole area. Then you fall asleep. It shifts back to the black sky dreamscape as your mother and father sit on either side of you and talk with you. They comment on your journey and mention that you need to be careful of Eric, potentially setting up another sequel. Your parents then ask you some questions regarding your choices and what you want for your future. The only difference in your choices gameplay-wise is the cutscene after this. You can choose to tell your parents you want to settle down and have a family with one of your love interests that you romanced. I obviously chose Catherine because MILF. Alternatively, you can say you'll settle down in the city and start a business, continue living a life of adventure, or becoming a warrior. Your parents have varying dialogue depending on which you choose, and eventually they get up to leave and say goodbye for good. Can I just say that I absolutely sobbed during this scene? The devs did such an amazing job conveying the emotion of it, with everything from the visuals to the music. It then cuts to you sleeping on the grass before waking up to your father, Radzig, standing over you. You have a heart-to-heart with him. Eventually, you go to hand him the sword back, but he tries to hand it back to you. Depending on the future you told your parents you wanted, you either accept it back or insist that he keep it. Afterwards, he reiterates what he told you at the end of the first game, to which you begin saying it alongside him. Eventually, you both begin heading back to Sokdol as Radzig teases you about Catherine, and you remark to him that she's old enough to be your mother, to which he replies that you could do with a bit of mothering. This is just how the cutscene plays out, by the way. I tried every dialogue option with Henry's parents, and Radzig always says that. Lastly, you see a pair of extra cutscenes, which in one shows Zizka challenging Dry Devil to shoot an apple off his head, but instead taking out his eye. The other one shows Sigismund's reaction to the news that the Italian court had been sacked.
Your humans plundered the estates of the House of Wallstein. The widow Anna is demanding compensation.
Compensation? Compensation, she wants. That little widow? And how are we supposed to pay that when there's no one even capable of guarding our treasury in the middle of
Ugh, this video is like one big, long, unskippable gay cutscene. Anyway, something I want to mention about Kingdom Come Deliverance is just how well they did Henry's arc. Struck by probably one of the worst tragedies possible before he's even really properly an adult, and the only real thing motivating him throughout the first game is his thirst for vengeance. Literally. You have an unfinished main quest the entire time in the first game to take revenge on Markvart. As time goes on, you see Henry morally excuse his decisions as, I suffered, so I'm the hero. Eventually, through life experiences and other characters, he slowly begins to realize that revenge is no way to live his life, and those he seeks vengeance against aren't quite so different from him. You see, Istvan, Eric, Markvart, etc. constantly try to point out to him that he's objectively not so different from them, and they're not quite the devils that his trauma has made them out to be. Throughout both games, you also see characters like Martin, Radzig, hell, even Istvan tell you not to let revenge drive your life. The thing that really nails that point home for Henry is when you find Markvart dying in that tavern, you realize he's just some man who has a loving family who did what he did out of duty. And that he's honestly a better person than Henry, because Markvart literally remembers every single person he killed, including Henry's father. Another thing I notice is that the games don't segue you into the right or wrong decision exclusively. There's moments where you can commit horrible acts that the game leads you right into, and it forces you to really think about the morality of what you're about to do, and gives you the option to find a way to not let the cycle continue. A good example of this is when you're trying to infiltrate Malashov and Zizka and Dry Devil just decide to burn and slaughter a whole village just to lure some guards out. You have to actively stand up against their plan and even duel Dry Devil to get them to change it. And even after they change it, they still berate you for it. Things like this really blur the line on if you and your group are the heroes or the villains, and if what you're doing is the right thing. Also, why the hell is it harder to finish the first game as a virgin and the second game as not a war criminal? What the fuck, Warhorse? Either way, all the people involved in making this game were truly motivated, and it shows in the final product. Kingdom Come Deliverance 1 and 2 are labors of love, and I really hope we get to see a third game. Preferably not waiting another 7 years for it, because I honestly just can't get enough of them. But I'd love to know what you think. Drop it in the comments if there's anything you enjoyed, any questions or critiques, or even just to make bald jokes at me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.